Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Monkey D, FIC, presenting to you today. What if Sabo never lost his memories? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1. The boy who remembered the sea was on fire. Not metaphorically, though it would have been poetic if it were. The surface of the water actually burned, thin sheets of oil ignited by the cannon blast catching and spreading in lazy, drifting arcs. Sabo watched it from 6 inches below the surface, the sound of the world above reduced to a deep, muffled roar, his lungs already screaming and his left side doing something wrong and hot that he couldn't look at yet because looking at it would mean acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would mean stopping, and stopping was the one thing he absolutely could not do. He kicked. His right leg responded. His left did not cooperate the way he needed it to. He kicked again. The surface shimmered above him, orange and gold through the water, and somewhere up there, getting smaller, was the fishing boat that had been carrying him toward the open sea. What was left of it? The fisherman was gone. Sabo had seen the man thrown clear in the first seconds, had watched him hit the water and not come back up, and there was a sound in his chest that he would have to deal with later because it had no name yet and there was no time. He broke the surface. Salt water and smoke flooded his senses simultaneously. He gasped, and the gasp turned into a cough, and the cough turned into something wet that he spat into the burning sea and didn't examine. The celestial dragon's ship was enormous. That was the thing nobody told you about them. You knew they were wealthy, you knew they were powerful, you knew they were everything wrong with the world arranged into human form. But you didn't truly understand it until you were this close and this small and the cannon ports were still open on the hull like a row of dead, indifferent eyes. It wasn't moving toward him. It wasn't moving away from him. It had simply fired and stopped caring about the results, the way you might step on an ant without bothering to check if it was dead. Sabo treaded water. His left side screamed. The fire was close enough that the heat dried the water on his face almost immediately, and he registered, distantly, that this was a very bad position to be in and that he had run out of clever plans approximately 3 minutes ago when the ship appeared on the horizon. He thought about Luffy. He didn't mean to, it wasn't a considered, deliberate thought. It arrived fully formed and urgent, the way a name comes to you right before you fall asleep. Luffy's face, round-cheeked and gap-toothed, absolutely furious about something. Probably Ace eating his food again. Ace's face, sharper and more guarded than Luffy's but quick to grin, the kind of grin that meant something was about to go spectacularly wrong. The 3 brothers. The sake cups. The vow. He went under. Not by choice. A swell caught him wrong and his left side buckled and suddenly there was water above him again and the orange light was already further away, and he thought, with a clarity that surprised him, this is probably how it ends, and then thought, immediately after, no it isn't, and reached for something, anything, and found nothing, and kept sinking anyway. The darkness was very blue and very quiet. Then a hand caught his wrist. He woke up to wood. That was the first thing, the texture of rough, treated wood under his cheek, and the smell of salt and something medicinal, and the sound of water against the hull. He was on a ship. Not the celestial dragon's ship. He knew that instantly, not because of any specific detail but because the quality of the air was different. A ship owned by the powerful smelled like privilege even in its working parts. This smelled like rope and engine oil and someone's half-eaten lunch. He tried to move and his entire left side told him absolutely not. Stay still. The voice was a woman's, no, a girl's, young but with an edge in it that had been earned rather than affected. Sabo turned his head, slowly, and found a girl about his age sitting cross-legged on the floor beside his hammock. Dark skin, bright eyes, short hair. She was watching him with the expression of someone who had been told to watch him, and was taking the assignment seriously. Where? His voice came out wrong. Too rough, too thin. You're on a Revolutionary Army vessel. She handed him a tin cup of water without waiting to be asked. You've been unconscious for 2 days. You have 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder that's been put back, and a burn on your left thigh that's going to scar. Also, you almost drowned. So stay still. He drank the water. It was flat and slightly metallic and the best thing he'd ever tasted. Revolutionary Army, he repeated. Yes. He processed this. It took a moment because his head was doing something unpleasant, a kind of slow rotation that wasn't related to any movement he was making. Who pulled me out? Commander Dragon, she said. Personally. Which is why everyone on the ship is extremely curious about you. A pause. I'm Koala. I'm going to be your contact until you're cleared to move around. Sabo, he said. I know. You said it in your sleep. She tilted her head slightly. You said a few things in your sleep. He looked at the ceiling of the ship. The wood beams above him were the same rough, honest wood as everything else on this ship, not ornate, not decorated, just functional. He thought about that for a moment. The difference between a place built to impress and a place built to work. He'd lived in the first kind his whole life, and had always wanted the second. What else did I say? He asked. Ace. And Luffy. She wasn't asking if those were real names or important names. She was just returning them to him. Something in his chest contracted so sharply that he almost thought it was a physical injury. They were real. The memory was right there, clear and immediate, not foggy the way dreams sometimes were when you first woke. He remembered the forest, the great terminal, the treasure chest, the way Ace had looked at him when he'd said I want to be a free man of the seas like he was the first person to have ever said something true. He remembered Luffy crying. He remembered being unable to cry himself, not from lack of feeling but from an excess of it, the kind of thing that went past tears into something quieter and more permanent. He remembered all of it. He remembered the letter he'd written. The one he'd sent before climbing into the boat. By the time you read this I'll be on the open sea. Don't come looking for me. I'll find you when the world is different. He'd meant it. He still meant it. But the world had not waited for him to be ready to change it. The Celestial Dragon, he said. The man on the ship. Saint, I don't even know his name. He just fired. He stopped. I know, Koala said. Her voice had changed, just slightly. A tightening at the edges. The fisherman who was taking me out. He didn't, I know, she said again, and this time the gentleness in her voice was the kind that acknowledged there was nothing gentle about what they were discussing, which made it real gentleness rather than performance. Sabo put the tin cup down on the hammock beside him. He stared at the ceiling. He breathed carefully, around his ribs. How old are you? He asked. 11. Same as you, I think. And you're in the Revolutionary Army. I was found by them, she said simply, with the specific simplicity of someone who has edited a longer story down to its survivable version. This is what I'm doing now. He nodded slowly. He could respect that. He understood that kind of simplicity. It was the same linguistic tool he'd been using to talk about his family for years, the way he said my parents rather than the nobles who owned me and home rather than the place I escaped from. You found the word that let you keep moving. Dragon? He said. Tell me about him. Koala's expression shifted, just slightly, into something more careful. He's the most wanted man in the world. He leads the Revolutionary Army. She seemed to be choosing words with precision. He believes the current world order is broken at the root, and that it has to be dismantled, not reformed. He pulled me out of the ocean himself. Yes. Why? You'd have to ask him, she said. But I think... A pause. I think he saw something in you. Or recognized something. I don't know. She looked at him directly. He's going to want to talk to you when you're strong enough. Sabo thought about this. He thought about Luffy, in Great Terminal, learning to fight because he couldn't use a sword and couldn't do anything else yet but refused to be weak. He thought about Ace's hands, which were always slightly calloused in a way that the noble son's hands never were because Ace had never let himself be soft. He thought about the fishing boat, and the cannon blast and the fisherman who didn't come back up and a celestial dragon on a ship who hadn't even looked at the results. I'm strong enough now, he said. Koala looked at his ribs, his bandaged thigh, his face, which presumably looked about as functional as he felt. You really aren't, she said. Take me to him anyway. Dragon was not what Sabo had expected, and Sabo genuinely hadn't known what to expect, which made the gap between expectation and reality more interesting than disorienting. The man was enormous, not in a way that announced itself, but in the way that large things in nature were large, simply and factually, and without apology. He was sitting at a plain table in what passed for a commander's quarters on this ship, which meant there were maps on every surface and a lamp hung at a practical angle, and that was the full extent of decoration. He looked up when Sabo came in, and Sabo was immediately, uncomfortably aware that he was being evaluated. Not the way nobles evaluated you, checking your clothes, your accent, the way you held yourself in the social architecture. This was something different. Dragon looked at him the way an experienced navigator looked at weather, reading for what was actually there, not what he wanted to find. Sabo sat down across from him without being invited, which he suspected was the right thing to do in this specific company. You're moving too quickly, Dragon said. Your ribs will heal, Sabo said. I've had worse. Dragon studied him. 11 years old. Yes. Noble family. Go a kingdom. By birth, Sabo said. Not by anything else. Something in Dragon's expression shifted, marginally. Your father has already sent a report to the Marines claiming you were killed by bandits in Great Terminal. Your body was found burned beyond recognition. The case is closed. Sabo absorbed this. He waited to feel something, grief, perhaps, or relief, or the particular complex shame that came from being erased by the people who were supposed to want you. He felt none of those things, which told him something about how much of himself he'd already removed from that equation. He wanted me gone, Sabo said. He got what he wanted. Yes. Dragon folded his hands on the table. They were a soldier's hands, scarred at the knuckles, efficient. And now you're here. Which raises the question of what you want. I want to change the world, Sabo said. He said it flatly, not dramatically, the way he'd say I want breakfast, like it was a basic requirement rather than a grand aspiration. Dragon's mouth didn't quite do anything, but Sabo had the distinct impression the man was almost amused. Most people who say that means something smaller. I know what I mean, Sabo said. The man who fired on me, he could have killed me without consequence, without inquiry, without anyone even asking if he'd done something wrong. Not because he's especially powerful. Because the system that rules this world decided long ago that some people matter and some people don't, and that division is maintained by violence, and everyone who benefits from the division is invested in maintaining the violence. He paused. I've read a lot of books, he added. I had access to a good library. Dragon was quiet for a moment. Outside, the sound of the ship, ropes and water and the creak of treated wood settling against the sea. You have brothers, Dragon said. It was not quite a question. And there it was. Sabo said nothing for a moment. The word brothers landed in his chest and stayed there, warm and specific and absolutely uncompromising. 2, he said. Ace and Luffy. They don't know I'm alive. Do you want them to? Sabo looked at his hands. They were wrapped in bandaging from where he'd grabbed something sharp in the water. He couldn't remember what, just the sensation of catching something and the relief of not sinking anymore. More than almost anything, he said. But, Dragon said. But I sent them a letter telling them I was going to sea. And I found my way to your ship, which means I found my way to a world that's bigger than Goa and bigger than the East Blue. He looked up. If I go back now, I go back as nothing. A kid who almost drowned and ran home to his brothers. I don't want to go back as nothing. Dragon looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Sabo wondered if he'd said something wrong, miscalculated in some way, misread the room. He'd been very good at reading rooms his whole life because reading rooms at the Outlook estate had been a survival skill, but he was aware that different rooms had different rules. You understand, Dragon said finally. That the Revolutionary Army is not a school. It is not a place for children to train until they're ready for the real world. The work we do has consequences. People die doing it. People we care about. I know, Sabo said. You're 11. I was trying to sail to sea alone at 11, Sabo said. I was doing that because the alternative was spending the rest of my life in a cage made of silk. I know what consequences look like. I'm not afraid of them. He paused. I'm afraid of not doing anything, he said. I'm afraid of what I'll be if I just survive without reason. Something crossed Dragon's face that was gone before Sabo could properly name it. Something that looked briefly like recognition. You can stay, Dragon said. You'll train. You'll earn your place here, the same as anyone else. No exceptions for age, and no exceptions for the fact that I pulled you out of the water. He fixed Sabo with a look that was somehow both austere and direct. And when you're ready, when you decide you're ready, we can talk about your brothers. Sabo nodded. His ribs hurt. His leg hurt. His shoulder ached in the deep, institutional way of something recently forced back into alignment. He was 11 years old, officially dead, on a ship full of revolutionaries in the middle of the ocean, and his two brothers thought he'd made it to the open sea and was living the life he promised them he'd go live. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Dragon said, and turned back to his maps. The weeks on the ship were a specific kind of education. Not the kind Sabo was used to. His tutors at the Outlook estate had taught him history, philosophy, economics, the proper forms of address for 100 different titles, how to hold a fork, how to hold a conversation that went nowhere productive and ended gracefully. What the Revolutionary Army taught him was different in every dimension except the intensity. Koala, it turned out, was not merely his assigned contact. She was also, apparently, something of a prodigy at a martial art called Fishman Karate, which she'd learned under circumstances she didn't elaborate on but which had left visible marks in the way she carried herself, a readiness, a watchfulness, the small constant preparation of someone who had learned that the world could demand things of your body without warning. She also, he discovered, had approximately no patience for self-pity. Again, she said on the fourth morning of training, standing above him while he lay on the deck and tried to convince his lungs to continue operating. I have cracked ribs, he pointed out. Which are healing, she said. The doctor said light movement was fine. The doctor said again, Sabo. He got up. He was furious at her, briefly and cleanly, the way you could be furious at someone and still understand that they were right. He took his stance. She moved, quick and precise as water finding cracks in stone, and he blocked 2 strikes and failed to block the third and ended up on the deck again. This time he got up before she said anything. She saw it, he could tell she saw it by the microscopic shift in her expression, the almost smile that she kept contained. Better, she said. What is this style? He asked, settling into position. The way you're reading my movements, it's not any form I've seen. Fishman Karate. She came at him again. He blocked, moved laterally instead of backward, and that was different enough that she had to adjust, and in the adjustment there was half a second of opening. He didn't have the form to use it correctly yet. But he saw it. It works with water, the water in the air, the water in the body. You redirect force rather than meeting it. She paused. You're good at reading openings, she said. That's not nothing. I've been fighting in Grey Terminal since I was 7, he said. Different kind of fighting. But the reading is the same. Where's Grey Terminal? Goa Kingdom. It's a... He paused. It's the garbage dump. For the whole kingdom. They dump everything there. Everything unwanted. He said it factually, the way dragons spoke factually. People live there too. Koala was quiet for a moment. And you fought there. Ace and I both did. We trained there. He said it the way he'd said everything about Ace and Luffy since he'd been on this ship, simply and specifically, keeping the names in circulation, refusing to let them become the past. They weren't the past. They were the destination. Tell me about them, Koala said, without the particular careful gentleness that meant if you want to and you don't have to. She said it the way you asked a friend to continue a story you were already invested in. He told her. They were practicing forms while he talked, the two of them moving through the morning air on the ship's deck, and he told her about Ace. The way Ace had found him when he first came to the forest. The way Ace had been ready to kill him without hesitation because Ace had survived by treating everyone as a threat until proven otherwise. The way that had slowly, painstakingly changed. He told her about Luffy, who had attached himself to both of them with the specific unstoppable enthusiasm of someone who simply refused to accept no as an answer to "Can I be your brother?" He told her about the terminal, the treasure, the fights, the days that stretched long and free and full of possibility. He told her about the gray morning when he'd understood that he had to leave. Koala listened without interrupting, which was something he was coming to understand was one of her specific qualities. She was capable of absolute stillness when she was receiving information she considered important. "You really think you'll get back to them?" she said when he'd finished. "I know I will," he said. She considered this. "Most people here who left people behind." She stopped. Started again. "It gets harder to find your way back. The longer you're in it, the more the army becomes the thing you're fighting for. And the people outside it start to feel they won't," he said. He said it without heat, without defensiveness, simply and certainly. "Ace and Luffy are the reason I understand what I'm fighting for. Not instead of it. The reason for it. A world that can fire a cannon at a kid on a fishing boat for no reason, that's not a world I want them to grow up in." He settled his stance. "Come at me again." She did. This time he managed to hold her off for almost 4 seconds before she dropped him, and 4 seconds was meaningfully better than 2. Dragon called him in again on the 6th week. Sabo came in cleaner this time, moving easier. The ribs were mostly healed, the burn on his thigh was a tight, new scar, and the shoulder had stopped complaining. He felt, for the first time in weeks, like himself. He sat down across from Dragon and waited. Dragon had a piece of paper in front of him. He pushed it across the table. Sabo looked at it. It was a wanted poster, old, printed badly, the image more approximate than accurate. But the name beneath the crude drawing was Porgasti, Ace, and the bounty was 30 million berry, and the designation was East Blue, Gray Terminal District, Minor. Sabo said nothing. He looked at the poster for a long moment. "He's been fighting," Dragon said. "Drawing attention. The Marines have been watching the Gray Terminal area for months." A pause. "He's clearly trying to make something of himself." "He always was," Sabo said quietly. "You'll want to know that Luffy Monkey is also on their records," Dragon said. "Not a poster yet. Too young, and the incidents have been small. But his name is there." Sabo looked up. "You've been watching them." "We watch a great many things," Dragon said. He was direct about it, not apologetic, which Sabo respected more than an explanation would have provided. "Your connection to them made it relevant." "Did you think I'd changed my mind?" Sabo asked. "Go back? I thought it was information you had a right to have," Dragon said. "And I think you should keep having it." He looked at Sabo steadily. "I'm not keeping you here against your will. I want that clear. You're 11 years old and you made a choice with the information available to you at the time. If the information changes, I made the right choice," Sabo said. And so did they. He looked at the wanted poster again. Porgasti, Ace. 30 million berry. His brother, making himself known to the world, making himself real, making himself someone the world would have to account for. Of course he was. That was exactly who Ace was. And Luffy. Small incidents. Too young for a poster. Just wait, Sabo thought, with a flash of something that was too warm to be called pride and too specific to be called anything else. Just wait. "I want to learn everything," Sabo said. He folded the poster carefully, not reverently, not sentimentally, just neatly, and set it on the table. Every fighting style you'll teach me. Intelligence work, strategy, the political architecture of the world government, the geography of every sea. I want to know all of it. That will take years, Dragon said. Then it takes years, Sabo said. They're building themselves into something. I should do the same. He looked at Dragon. And when I'm ready, when I'm actually ready, not just impatient, I want to find them. I want to find them as something. Not just as the brother who didn't die. Dragon studied him. That same navigator's reading of weather. You want to be worth the reunion, he said. It was such a precise articulation of the thing that Sabo felt the words land with a small shock, the way a key feels when it finds the right lock. Yes, he said. Dragon nodded once. Then we start properly tomorrow, he said. Tonight rest. Sabo stood, and on his way to the door, something stopped him. He wasn't sure what, some intuition, some echo of the thing he'd felt watching Dragon for 6 weeks, reading the man the way he read every room. He turned back. You have someone too, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Someone you're building yourself toward. Or away from. Someone that. He stopped, aware that he was pushing into territory he hadn't been invited into. Dragon looked at him for a long moment. The lamp above the table swayed slightly with the motion of the ship, and the shadows moved in slow arcs across the maps and the plain walls. Good night, Sabo, Dragon said. Sabo went. He stood on the deck that night in the particular darkness that belonged to open water, absolute above and absolute below, the stars scattered with the same indifferent generosity as always, the horizon a clean theoretical line where two kinds of black met. He thought about the sake cups. The vow. Brothers bound by cup and word. He thought about Luffy's face when they'd raised the cups, how seriously Luffy had taken it. Luffy, who took very little seriously in a formal sense, had been completely and wholly present in that moment, as if he understood without articulation that some things needed to be treated with their full weight. He thought about the letter he'd sent. By now they'd read it. By now they knew he'd gone. And they didn't know he'd almost died, and they didn't know where he was, and they thought he was out there somewhere on the open sea, building toward the life he told them he was going to build. He was. Just not the way he'd imagined it. I'll find you when the world is different, he'd written. The world wasn't different yet. But he was on a ship full of people trying to make it so. He was learning to fight and learning to think and learning the shape of the enemy. Not just the celestial dragon on his ship who fired cannons at fishing boats, but the whole architecture of authority and indifference that made that man's action possible and consequence-free. He was learning the name of the thing. He would learn to fight it. And then he would find his brothers, and they would be together again, and they would be 3 things that the world had tried to erase: a noble's discarded son, a pirate's feared bastard, and a child of the sea. And they would be exactly what they'd always been in the forest, with their stolen food and their sake cups and their absolute refusal to be what anyone else wanted them to be. Free men, Sabo thought. All 3 of us. The stars didn't answer. They didn't need to. He was 11 years old and dead and alive and burning, and the sea went on forever in every direction, which had always seemed like a problem and was now, suddenly, abundantly, unmistakably a promise. He went below deck. He slept without dreaming. He woke before dawn and was at the training area before Koala, and when she arrived, still sleep-soft and faintly surprised to find him there, she looked at him for a moment, and then simply picked up her stance. They trained until the sun was fully up and the sea was gold. Chapter 2. A decade of burning. The city of Brasswater didn't appear on most maps. That was by design. It occupied a stretch of south blue coastline that the world government had officially designated as uninhabited territorial waters, in documents that nobody outside of a specific bureaucratic tier ever read, which meant the 40,000 people who actually lived there existed in a kind of legal limbo that the Marines found convenient to ignore, and the local lord found even more convenient to exploit. The buildings were stacked against each other the way desperate things stacked, close and precarious, each one borrowing structural integrity from its neighbor, the whole arrangement suggesting that if you removed one building from the middle, the entire district would exhale and collapse toward the sea. Sabo liked it. He'd always liked places that existed in defiance of the official record. He was crouched on the roof of what had formerly been a grain warehouse and was currently being used as temporary housing for 200 displaced families from the eastern quarter, watching the Marine patrol below him with the patient, precise attention of someone who had learned to read military movement the way other people read text, not just the words but the rhythm, the hesitation. The places where the formation went slightly wrong and revealed the uncertainty underneath. There were 40 Marines in the patrol. Heavy armed, which meant they were nervous. You didn't bring that much hardware to a civilian population unless you were expecting resistance, or manufacturing a reason to create it. The patrol commander was a captain, young, new to command, holding himself with the careful rigidity of someone performing confidence rather than possessing it. Behind the patrol, at the edge of the square, 3 covered wagons waited with their horses unhitched. Wagons without horses. Which meant they weren't planning to leave. "Koala," he said quietly. Her voice came back through the small den mushy in his coat pocket, tinny and immediate. "I see it. Wagons have been there since this morning. Roster said this was a collection operation, taxes outstanding from the eastern quarter families. But they brought a captain and 40 men to collect taxes. They're not here for taxes," Sabo said. "No," she agreed. 13 of those families in the warehouse below you have members with Revolutionary Army ties. Active or former. Someone sold the list. Sabo looked at the warehouse roof beneath his feet. 40,000 people in a city that didn't officially exist, paying taxes to a lord who reported to a government that didn't acknowledge them, and now a Marine patrol with covered wagons and a nervous captain and a list of names that some frightened or greedy person had handed over because the world had arranged itself so that betrayal was often the only currency the powerless could spend. "How long before they move?" he said. "Patrol rhythm suggests they're waiting for a second unit from the north quarter," Koala said. "Maybe 20 minutes. And our people? 12 are still in the warehouse. One made it out this morning, Ferris, the old woman from Unit 4. She warned me. That's how we knew." A pause. "Sabo," Dragon said, "observe and report." "This wasn't supposed to be an extraction." Dragon said, "Observe and report on the political situation in Brasswater." Sabo said. "The political situation in Brasswater has changed." A longer pause. "You're already planning something." "I've been planning something for the last 10 minutes. He said. "Can you get to the North Road?" "I'm already there," she said, which was why they worked well together. Sabo stood up. He was 22 now, which meant he'd spent 11 years being exactly what he'd told Dragon he intended to be, and the person standing on the warehouse roof in Brasswater bore the same relationship to the 11-year-old in the hammock as a finished blade bore to raw ore, recognizably the same substance, unrecognizably different in form and function. He was lean and tall, dressed in a dark coat over a white shirt, a battered top hat sitting at the angle it always sat because putting it on straight felt wrong. The pipe he carried at his belt was steel, smooth and unadorned, and it was the only thing he carried because it was the only thing he needed. He dropped off the warehouse roof. The fall was 3 stories. He landed in a roll that carried his momentum forward and brought him upright in the alley below without pausing, without stumbling, the way water lands, finding its level instantly. A woman hanging laundry at her window made a sound. He put a finger to his lips and she stared at him, and then looked at the warehouse, and then at the patrol in the square, and then back at him, and pressed her own lips together and turned back to her laundry with the specific studied indifference of someone who had learned that seeing things in this city was dangerous. He went through the back of the warehouse by a door that was unlocked because someone who'd known he might need it that way had made sure it was unlocked, which was the kind of operational detail that took years to become second nature. Inside, the building smelled like wood and close-packed living, cooking smells, children, the persistent damp of a building near the sea that never fully dried out. The families were already aware something was wrong. You could feel it in the quality of the silence. Not peaceful silence but watchful silence, the held-breath kind. Children had been gathered to the back of the large room. Adults stood near the windows at angles that let them see out without being seen. One man, heavy-set and gray-bearded, spotted Sabo coming in and crossed to him fast. "You're the contact?" the man said. "Yes. Miko told me about you," Sabo said, using the name Koala operated under in the city, keeping it brief. "Who else besides your group?" "The Ferrante family on the second floor, 3 adults. The old man Lima from the east side of the building. That's everyone." His hands were doing something involuntary, a small repetitive motion at his sides, and he kept visibly stopping it, and it kept coming back. Fear working itself out through the body. "They have our names. If they take us, they won't," Sabo said. The man looked at him. He was probably 45, maybe 50, the kind of person who had spent his life calculating odds and making careful choices and had wound up here anyway, in a city that didn't exist, in a warehouse, waiting for a knock on the door that would rearrange everything. He looked at Sabo the way people sometimes did, trying to find evidence of the confidence being offered, checking it for structural integrity. Sabo met his eyes. He didn't add anything. The statement stood without support because it was true, and true things didn't need to be propped up with reassurances. The man breathed out. "What do we do?" "Get everyone to the north side of the building. There's a loading access that exits to the alley along the canal. You'll hear a signal, 3 short, 1 long." He was already moving toward the stairs. "When you hear it go, there will be someone at the canal end to take you through." "And you?" the man called after him. Sabo was already on the stairs. "I'm going to be in the square," he said. The Marine captain's name, Sabo had learned from Koala's briefing that morning, was Hilton Sears. 29 years old. Fast-tracked through the ranks on the strength of an uncle who held a Commodore's commission and a family with enough world government connections to smooth the path considerably. His actual competence was unclear from the record, which meant it was probably modest. People whose paths were smoothed rarely developed the rough edges that genuine competence required. Captain Sears was standing in the square doing exactly what Sabo had predicted a nervous young commander would do while waiting. He was issuing small, unnecessary instructions to soldiers who didn't need them, creating the performance of control because the reality of control felt insufficient. Sabo walked into the square from the eastern alley, in broad daylight, at a comfortable pace, and kept walking until he was close enough that Captain Sears had to either acknowledge him or pretend not to have seen him, and pretending was a choice that carried its own problems. Sears turned. He looked at Sabo, the coat, the hat, the pipe at the belt, the complete and specific lack of alarm on the face of someone walking toward 40 armed Marines, and his expression did several things rapidly before settling on authority. "This is a restricted area," Sears said. "Move on." "I was going to suggest the same to you," Sabo said. He stopped at a comfortable speaking distance. Close enough for a conversation, too close for a comfortable sword draw. "This operation is based on a compromised informant list. At least 4 of the names on it are wrong, people who left the organization years ago and have no current ties. Which means when you arrest them and they don't produce the intelligence you're expecting, this whole operation gets reported up the chain as an embarrassing failure, and given your career trajectory, you probably can't afford that." A long, crystalline silence. Sears stared at him. "Who are you?" "Someone offering you a way out of an embarrassment," Sabo said. "Take your men, take your wagons, and report that your intelligence was faulty and the targets had been moved. Accurate, as it happens. Clean. No casualties, no incident report, no awkward questions from your uncle about why his investment underperformed." Something shifted in Sears' face, not anger, not yet. Calculation. Which was interesting. It meant he wasn't stupid, just inexperienced, and Sabo filed that away as relevant. "Arrest him," Sears said. The 6 Marines nearest Sabo moved. They were reasonably fast, well-trained, moving in the coordinated pattern of people who drilled this specific action. The first one reached Sabo and found nothing there. Sabo had moved a fraction of a second before the hands arrived, A sidestep that put him outside the formation rather than inside it, and the Marine's momentum carried him 2 steps past where his target had been. The second Marine was more careful, came in slower, which was the wrong adjustment because slow gave Sabo time. The pipe was in his hand. He didn't remember taking it from his belt. It was just there, the way it always was now, extension of intent rather than deliberate action, and he redirected the Marine's reaching arm with the end of the pipe, and the man spun and sat down on the cobblestones, not injured, just repositioned. The third and fourth came together. Sabo put the pipe horizontally between them, pivoted, and both men's momentum used each other against themselves in a way that was almost too efficient to look like fighting. They went down. The fifth stopped just outside of reach, and the sixth stopped when the fifth stopped. The whole exchange had taken perhaps 4 seconds. Sabo hadn't moved more than 3 feet from where he'd been standing. "I learned this from a lot of different places," he said conversationally to Sears, who was very still now with his hand on his sword hilt and the expression of someone rapidly recalculating a situation. "The redirection principle is fishman karate. The footwork is something I put together myself. The pipe," he looked at it briefly. "That's just a pipe. Marines!" Sears had his sword out. "Formation." Sabo moved. Not toward the Marines. That would have been the obvious move, and Sears had clearly been trained to respond to obvious moves. He moved to the left, toward the covered wagons, and he moved fast enough that there were 2 seconds of confused reorientation in the formation while they tried to track him. In those 2 seconds he reached the nearest wagon, looked inside, empty, as he'd expected, rigged for prisoner transport, and looked back at Sears. "Empty wagons," he said. "You weren't here for taxes." Sears had found his footing, literally and figuratively. He came forward with his sword leveled, and 2 Marines moved up to flank, and the formation was decent. He'd clearly absorbed at least some of his training. "Last chance to stand down," Sears said. He'd found a version of authority that was less performance now. Some genuine steel underneath. Sabo put the pipe away. Sears blinked. The flanking Marines blinked. "I have a message for your command structure," Sabo said. "The Revolutionary Army knows about this operation. We know about the informant. We know about the list. And we know about the arrangement your command made with the local Lord's tax office, which is corruption by any definition the world government cares to apply." He let that settle for exactly 1 second. "You can arrest me and delay the report getting up the chain, or you can let me walk out of here and have this conversation stay between us. Your choice, Captain." Sears looked at him. There was a particular kind of silence that had weight in it, the kind that preceded a decision with real consequences, and you could hear it in the quality of the air. 3 short whistles, then 1 long one. From the direction of the canal. Sears' eyes moved toward the sound. Sabo turned and walked out of the square the way he'd come in. Nobody fired. Nobody followed. Whether that was wisdom or shock or the specific paralysis of a young commander who'd just had a scenario play out in no way resembling his briefing documents, Sabo didn't know and didn't look back to find out. Koala had the 12 people at the canal end of the alley, loaded into 2 river boats that sat low and anonymous in the water. The gray-bearded man was there, his hands finally still at his sides. 3 children were asleep on each other in the prow of the nearer boat, because children had a remarkable capacity to sleep through catastrophe. Koala looked at Sabo when he arrived, assessed him for damage, found none, and looked slightly annoyed. "You walked into the square," she said. "I did." "Dragon said observe and report." "Dragon will want to know that Captain Sears is open to persuasion under the right framing," Sabo said, stepping into the boat. "That's useful intelligence." Koala stared at him for a moment in the particular way she stared when she was deciding whether to argue. She had a gift for it, the stare that communicated "I know exactly what you did, and why, and I'm assessing whether it was worth the risk" with complete precision. After 11 years he could read every variation. This one concluded, as it usually did, in a small exhale that was almost but not quite a sigh. "He didn't fire," she noted. "No. That's interesting." That's what I thought. She pushed the boat off from the canal wall with one foot, quick and practiced. The other boat followed. They moved through the canal system in the flat gray light of the afternoon, the city stacking itself above them on both sides, laundry and windows and the sounds of 40,000 people going about the business of existing in a place that didn't officially exist. The gray-bearded man was watching Sabo from the other end of the boat. He had the look of someone who had received something they hadn't been sure they deserved, and was examining the gift for catches. "The army sent one person?" he said. Not accusatory. Genuinely curious. "One was enough," Koala said pleasantly, which was the kind of pleasantness that had a very definite edge to it. The man looked at Sabo. "You knew they'd back down." "I knew Sears might," Sabo said. "Not all of them would. But the formation, the way he was holding himself, he was there because he was told to be, not because he believed in the operation. That's workable." He looked at the water ahead of them. "Marines who genuinely believe in what they're doing are harder. They have something to be. And the ones who don't believe? They're just waiting for a better option," Sabo said. The canal opened toward the sea, and the late afternoon light hit the water and broke into long, gold pieces, and the boats moved into it without hurrying, because hurrying now would draw attention and they were past the part that required hurry. The Revolutionary Army's South Blue Regional Base was 3 hours out of Brass Water by fast ship, built into the cliff face of an island that the charts marked as geologically unstable, avoid anchorage. Which was true in a technical sense but not in the specific way the charts implied. The instability was structural at the northern end. The southern end, where the base was carved into solid granite 200 feet above the waterline, was as stable as anything the world had built. Sabo filed his report standing up, at Dragon's table, Dragon's South Blue operational desk, which was different from his main desk in the same way that Dragon himself was different in the field. He was wearing the same coat, had the same austere quality, but something in his posture was less contained, more present. Dragon in the field was where he made sense. "Sears is a functional contact," Sabo said, working through the summary. "Corruption in his chain of command gives us leverage if we need it, and more importantly, gives him motivation to look away when looking away is what we need. I don't think he's a bad man. I think he's a man in a system that hasn't given him a good reason to be better than it requires." He paused. "The informant from Brass Water, we need to find them before the Marines realize the extraction succeeded. If Sears reports the operation as a failure due to bad intelligence, the informant is a loose end with motivation. Already being handled," Dragon said. He was looking at the report Sabo had handed him, not reading it so much as checking it against what Sabo was saying. The reports always matched. He'd never given Dragon a reason for that habit to break. 12 people extracted. No casualties. No casualties, Sabo confirmed. "I said observe and report," Dragon said. He set the report down. He was 61 years old now and had lost nothing. If anything, the decade and change had refined him, cleared away whatever margin there had ever been between the man and his purpose. He looked at Sabo the way he'd looked at him on that first ship, reading for what was actually there. The observation informed the decision. Sabo said, "Don't be clever with me. Those 12 people, I know who they are," Dragon said. "I know what would have happened to them. I also know that the operation you ran exposed your presence in Brass Water, potentially compromised Miko's cover, and gave a Marine captain a face to put to a name." He paused. The Revolutionary Army's Chief of Staff shouldn't be playing street tricks in South Blue port cities. Then send someone else next time you need someone who can read a situation and make a call, Sabo said. There was no heat in it, no defiance. Just fact. Dragon looked at him. A long, familiar moment, the kind they'd been having for 11 years, the kind where Sabo had learned that Dragon's pauses were not hesitation but the space he gave other people to reconsider before he responded. Sabo never used the space to reconsider. Dragon had noticed this and stopped treating the pauses as invitations and started treating them as punctuation. "Koala," Dragon said. She was in the doorway. She'd been there, Sabo knew, since they'd arrived. Not eavesdropping because she never had to eavesdrop. Dragon's Field Base had an open-door policy that was more policy than door. Sir? Debrief in the morning. Get some rest tonight. He looked back at Sabo. You too. I need to review the Eastern operation files, Sabo said. They'll be there in the morning. There's something in the naval movement reports, the pattern over the last 6 weeks. I want to, Sabo. Dragon's voice had a quality in it that wasn't command, exactly. It was something quieter than command, and therefore more effective. Rest. Sabo held the moment for a second, then let it go. He picked up his hat from the corner of the desk where he'd set it when he came in, settled it onto his head at the angle it belonged, and went. His room in the base was small, which he preferred. Rooms that were too large for their contents felt like questions about what was missing. He had a cot, a desk, a shelf with 6 books he was actively reading and 3 he was rereading, and a window cut into the granite that faced east. At night the east window showed stars and the suggestion of open water. In the mornings it showed the sea in the specific shade of blue-going gold that had been the first thing he'd properly loved about the ocean when he was 11 years old, and discovering it for the first time. Koala knocked and came in with 2 bowls of something that smelled like rice and a vegetable he couldn't identify but was probably edible based on the smell. She sat on the floor without asking permission, because she'd been sitting on floors of rooms he was in for 11 years and asking permission had never been part of it. Sears didn't fire, she said. You keep coming back to that. It surprised me, she said. I thought he would. She handed him a bowl. You didn't seem surprised. I was a little surprised, he admitted. I was about 60% confident. You walked into a square with 40 armed Marines on 60% confidence? 75% that I could handle the outcome either way, he said. The 60% was specifically about Sears. Koala looked at him with the expression she'd been perfecting for a decade. Not quite exasperation, not quite fondness, something that lived exactly between them and that she seemed to have decided was the appropriate register for everything Sabo did that was simultaneously correct and alarming. You're insufferable, she said. Yes, he agreed. They ate in the comfortable silence that lived between people who had stopped needing to fill silence with noise years ago. Outside the window, the sea was shifting into its evening colors, the sky going from blue to a bruised gold to the first suggestion of purple at the horizon. There was something else, Koala said after a while. She set her bowl down. In the marine movement reports you wanted to look at. I flagged it before you could get to it. Something in her tone was different. He looked at her. She reached into her coat and took out a folded piece of paper, printed intelligence, one of the regularized report formats they used. She held it for a moment before handing it over, and that hesitation was so unlike her that he felt the quality of the information before he read it. He unfolded it. It was a Marine intelligence bulletin, intercepted through their network in the New World sector. Standard format, Naval Operations Update. He read through the operational notes quickly, scanning for the relevant section. Port Gas D. Ace, confirmed assignment to Whitebird Pirates, 2nd Division Commander. Current bounty, 550 million berry. Sabo stared at that number for a moment. 550 million. Ace. His brother, the boy who'd sat in a forest and Great Terminal and decided by sheer force of will that he was going to become something, he'd done it. He'd found his way to Whitebird, which was not just a crew but a statement, an entire philosophy about strength and belonging made manifest on the ocean. 2nd Division Commander. There were people with smaller bounties who'd been operating for decades. He kept reading. The bulletin was primarily tracking Blackbird, Marshal D. Teach, now operating with a crew of his own, the Blackbird Pirates, generating escalating marine attention after a series of incidents. Sabo's eyes moved down the page and found the sentence that had made Koala hesitate. Intelligence suggests Porgasti, Ace, 2nd Division Commander of the Whitebird Pirates, is pursuing Blackbird independently following an internal incident aboard the Moby Dick. Whitebeard Pirates Command has reportedly attempted to discourage this pursuit. Status: active engagement expected. Sabo read it twice. When did this come in? He said. This morning, Koala said. While you were in Brasswater. He set the paper down on the cot beside him. He looked at the east window. The horizon was fully purple now, the first stars coming in. Ace was chasing Blackbeard. Chasing him alone, against the counsel of Whitebeard himself, which meant this was personal in a way that went past strategic judgment. The marine record on Blackbeard was concerning enough on its own. The man was dangerous in ways that the bulletin's dry language understated. But what concerned Sabo more than the danger was the pattern he recognized. Ace chasing something that had wronged him, alone, refusing to be talked down. He'd seen that pattern from closer than anyone. Ace had never learned how to let something go that had gotten under his skin. Sabo pressed both hands flat against his thighs, a centering pressure, and thought with the specific focused clarity he'd been training himself toward for a decade. Luffy, he said. Still East Blue mostly, Koala said. He's started. Got a small crew, a ship. Word is he set out for the Grand Line recently. A pause. Sabo. His bounty is 30 million. Sabo looked at her. Same as Ace's first one, she said quietly. 3 brothers, all burning bright. All making themselves known to a world that had tried to have no record of any of them. Sabo felt something that was not quite a smile but was the internal version of one, warm and aching in equal measure. We need to move faster, he said. Dragon's operation in the New World. I know the operation, Sabo said. I wrote half the plan. We need to move faster inside the plan. The political situation in the New World is going to break soon. Whitebeard's health, Blackbeard's ambition, the Shichibukai reshuffling, all of it is converging. He picked up the intelligence bulletin again. And my brother is riding straight into the middle of it. Sabo. Koala said his name the way she sometimes did, not to stop him, but to make sure he was hearing her specifically. He looked at her. Which brother? She said. Both of them, he said. Eventually. He looked back at the bulletin. Ace first. He's the one in immediate range of something catastrophic. Dragon won't authorize, Dragon won't need to, Sabo said, and the particular quietness in his voice when he said it was the kind that had been developed over 11 years of understanding that some decisions were made by the person with the most complete picture of what was at stake, and that authority was not the same as knowledge. Koala looked at him for a long time with the full weight of everything they'd been through together, every operation, every cold night on a ship, every argument, every impossible situation resolved through the specific alchemy of his willingness to walk into it and her willingness to make sure he walked out, and then she looked away, at the east window, at the stars. I'll start pulling the New World movement data, she said. Tonight. Sabo said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. He looked at the east window too, at the same stars, and for the first time in years he let himself think the thought all the way through to its end instead of stopping it at the threshold where it became too large to manage. He was going to find Ace. He was going to walk up to his brother, 22 years old to Ace's 20, the little brother who'd been dead for 11 years, and he was going to look him in the face and say, I remember everything. I never forgot. And then whatever happened, happened. He was ready for it. He'd been ready for it since a night on a ship when he was 11 years old, standing on a deck with stars above and the ocean below, and nothing between him and the horizon but his own refusal to let the distance be permanent. Outside, the sea kept moving. It always did. It was the most reliable thing in the world, which was maybe why so many people chose to live on it, because something that refused to be still was also something that refused to be finished. Sabo picked up the intelligence bulletin and began to read it again, this time more slowly, looking for every detail the dry language was carrying without knowing it carried. He had work to do. Chapter 3. The name on the wind. The New World smelled different. Sabo had been told this by every revolutionary operative who'd worked above the red line, and he'd filed it as subjective, the kind of thing people said about places that had shaped them, attributing qualities to geography that actually belonged to experience. Then he crossed the red line himself and understood immediately that it wasn't subjective at all. The air was different. The light was different. Even the way the sea moved beneath the ship was different, more deliberate, somehow, like a thing that had opinions about where it was going. He'd been in the New World for 6 days, and he still noticed it every morning. The ship was a small revolutionary transport, fast and deliberately unremarkable, the kind of vessel that got lost in the visual noise of a busy sea route without trying. Koala was at the charts. 2 other operatives, Hack and a young woman named Sura who joined the army 2 years ago, handled the running of the ship with the quiet efficiency of people who'd learned that competence was quieter than effort. Sabo was on the prow, reading. Not the intelligence files, he'd read those until the information was structural, built into his thinking rather than sitting on top of it. He was reading one of the 6 books from his shelf, a philosophical text on the nature of inherited authority that he'd been working through for a month and that was getting progressively more infuriating as the author approached a conclusion that Sabo could see was going to disappoint him. He read 3 more pages, reached the conclusion, confirmed his disappointment, and closed the book. He chickened out. He called back toward Koala. The author? She didn't look up from the charts. He spends 200 pages building a perfectly good case for why inherited authority is philosophically indefensible, and then decides at the end that gradual reform is sufficient. He set the book down. 200 pages. People get scared of their own conclusions, Koala said. Yes, Sabo said. That's the whole problem with the world, actually. Hack looked up from the rigging with the expression of someone deciding whether this conversation required his participation. He was enormous, a fishman, broad as a doorway, with the specific unhurried quality of someone whose physical presence had always been sufficient to settle most arguments before they started. He'd been with the Revolutionary Army for 15 years and had the operational record to prove it. Are we talking about the book or the world government? He asked. Yes, Sabo said. Hack returned to the rigging. The ship moved through the morning, and Sabo watched the horizon and thought about the intelligence picture he'd been assembling for the last 2 weeks. Not just the bulletin about Ace, that was the urgent piece, the thing with the clock attached, but the larger pattern. Blackbeard's movements over the past year formed a shape when you plotted them sequentially, and the shape was deliberate. He wasn't just moving through the new world opportunistically. He was building towards something. Accumulating bounties, establishing fear, making himself into a thing that the major powers would have to account for. And Ace was chasing that shape without being able to see it from the outside. The problem with being inside something was that you couldn't see its outline. Ace knew Blackbeard as a personal betrayal, a crewmate who had murdered a brother and blown up everything that came with that. Sabo knew Blackbeard as a pattern, as an operator, as someone who moved through the world with a specific and terrifying kind of intention. Both perspectives were true. Only one of them was sufficient for what Ace was walking into. Koala, he said. How far to the intercept point? 2 days if the weather holds, she said. 1.5 if it doesn't, because we'll have to take the northern route, and it's shorter. She paused. Storm system coming in from the southwest. I'm watching it. Wake me if it develops, he said, and went below to sleep, because he'd learned long ago that rest was a tactical resource the same as any other. He woke 4 hours later to Koala's hand on his shoulder, and the sound of the sea behaving badly. Storm came faster than projected, she said, already moving back toward the hatch. Northern route. The storm was not a small thing. New World storms had a quality that East Blue storms lacked, a purposefulness, as if the weather above the red line had absorbed some of the general intensity of everything below it. The waves were running at 15 feet when they came up through the hatch, and the sky to the southwest was the color of an old bruise, purple-green and moving fast. Sabo took the wheel without being asked, because Sura was better at the sail rigging than at steering in heavy weather and Koala was better at navigation than either, and Hack could do everything but was most useful at the physical operation of the sails in conditions that would have been impossible for a human frame. They'd run bad weather together enough times that the division was automatic. He steered into it rather than across it, which was the counterintuitive call that was almost always right in a small ship. Fighting a new world storm sideways was a way to lose. You went through. The bow climbed the first big swell and came down hard on the other side, and Sabo leaned into the wheel and felt the ship's resistance, its argument against the water, and steered it past arguing into something more like negotiation. "There's something on the scope," Hack called from the mast. Even in this weather his voice carried. "Ship. South-southwest." "In this?" Koala said. "Big ship. Running parallel to the storm track." A pause. "Flying Whitebird's flag." Sabo's hands didn't move on the wheel. His attention did. A Whitebird ship, running parallel to the storm, which meant running a course that was either extremely confident or extremely urgent. Whitebird's fleet moved with calculated deliberation as a rule. You didn't become the world's most powerful crew by being reckless about weather. A ship running parallel to this storm wasn't being reckless. It was being committed, which was a different thing and more interesting. "Can we intercept without getting killed by the weather?" he said. Another pause from Hack, who was doing calculations that involved physics, seamanship, and the specific wisdom of someone who'd been sailing new world waters for a decade and a half. "Possibly," he said. "The storm's edge is cleaner on the northern side. If they hold their course and we push hard north, we can come around to them in maybe 3 hours. "Do it," Sabo said. "If the storm shifts, it won't," Koala said, already at the charts, reading the weather pattern with the same precise attention she brought to everything. "It's tracking southwest to northeast. We go north, we're outside the worst of it in 40 minutes. She looked up. "But Sabo, why would a Whitebird ship be running this course in this weather?" "Because whatever it's running toward matters more than the weather," he said. Koala held his eyes for a second. Then she turned back to the charts. The Whitebird ship was called the Striker, and it was small for a ship affiliated with the Moby Dick's fleet, a fast, one-mast vessel built for speed over capacity. Sabo recognized the class, personal runner. The kind of ship a division commander used when they were operating independently of the main fleet. They came alongside it after 2.5 hours, in the cleaner air north of the storm track, the sea still running high but manageable. He'd had Hack raise a neutral flag, not revolutionary, not marine, not affiliated with anything identifiable, because approaching a Whitebird vessel with known Revolutionary Army markings while looking for a specific named crew member was a conversation he wanted to have on his own terms rather than someone else's. The figure that appeared on the Striker's deck when they pulled alongside was not Ace. He was a large young man, dark hair, bare-chested in the cold, which said something about either constitution or stubbornness, with a grin that had the particular quality of someone who found being on the open sea in bad weather fundamentally amusing. He looked across the gap between the ships at Sabo with the bright, assessing eyes of someone who'd learned to read a situation fast. "Neutral flag and no guns out," the young man called. "Either you're peaceful or you're clever enough to pretend. Which is it?" "Both, usually," Sabo called back. "I'm looking for poor Gasty, Ace. I have information relevant to his current chase." The grin didn't change, but the eyes did, sharpened, recalibrated. "Lots of people looking for Ace. Most of them want to be the one to capture him." "I'm not most people," Sabo said. "Tell him the name Sabo and see what happens." A pause. The young man, Sabo placed him now from the intelligence files, Marco, 1st Division Commander, Phoenix Devil Fruit, the closest thing Whitebird had to a second-in-command, studied him with considerably more attention than the grin suggested. "Sabo," he repeated. "That's not a name I know." "Ace knows it," Sabo said. Marco disappeared from the deck. Sabo waited. The sea moved around both ships with the reduced urgency of weather that had made its point and was now coasting. Koala appeared at Sabo's shoulder, said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. She was worried. Not about the Whitebird crew, she was worried about what happened when names got said to people who'd been carrying them as grief. Marco came back. His expression had changed in a way that was hard to specify but unmistakable, some private recalibration happening behind the grin that was now several degrees less casual. Ace wants to know how you know that name, he said. He wants to know where you got it. Tell him it's mine, Sabo said. Tell him I've had it since I was 10 years old, and I'd like it back. Another silence. A longer one. The ships sat alongside each other in the gray-gold afternoon, the storm tracking away to the south, the sea settling into something almost cooperative. When Marco came back the third time, he had someone with him. The first thing Sabo registered was that Ace was tall. Which was intellectually obvious. 11 years was a long time, and the 8-year-old who'd found a noble kid in his forest and nearly beaten him to death for trespassing had been growing since then. But knowing it and seeing it were entirely different propositions. Ace was 20, broad-shouldered, carrying himself with the specific physical confidence of someone who'd earned their body through considerable effort. He was wearing his hat, the one that appeared in every intelligence photo Sabo had found over the years. The way he wore it said something about permanence, about the things people held onto. He was standing at the railing of the striker, and he was looking at Sabo with an expression that had stopped being an expression and started being something rawer. Sabo took off his hat. He wasn't sure why he did it. Some instinct about faces, about letting himself be seen clearly. He held it at his side and stood in the open on the deck of the transport ship and let his brother look at him. Ace said nothing for a long time. Beside him, Marco had gone very still with the careful quality of someone who understood they were standing next to something fragile and enormous, and was trying not to breathe on it. "You're dead," Ace said. His voice was wrong, too flat, too controlled, the voice of someone applying structure to something that didn't want to be structured. "I'm not," Sabo said. "I saw." Ace stopped. "The explosion. The ship. They told me. I was pulled out," Sabo said. "Dragon. The Revolutionary Army commander. He got me out of the water." He paused. "My memories were intact. I remembered everything. I've known who I was since I woke up." Something moved across Ace's face that Sabo had no complete word for. Shock was part of it. Anger was part of it. Something older and rawer than either of those was most of it. 11 years? Ace said. "Yes. 11 years and you didn't." He stopped again. His hands on the railing were very tight. "You didn't send word." "You didn't, I know," Sabo said. He didn't flinch from it, didn't rush to justify it. He let it be what it was. "I know that." "Why?" The word came out harder than everything before it, not a shout but the opposite of a shout, the kind of word that was quiet because it had been held under pressure for a very long time. "Because I was 10 years old and the world was enormous and I didn't know yet how to find you without putting you in danger," Sabo said. "And then I was 12 and I was learning to fight. And 14 and I was running operations in the West Blue. And 16 and I was..." He stopped himself. Not because the reasons ran out. Because he could hear what he was doing, building a case, piling reasons, and reasons were not what this was about. "I kept waiting until I was something," he said. "I kept thinking I should find you when I was ready. When I was enough." Ace stared at him. "Enough for what?" "For this," Sabo said simply. "For standing in front of you and being worth the reunion." The silence after that was not empty. It was full of 11 years of Ace carrying a grief that had been unnecessary, and Sabo carrying a choice that had been right and wrong simultaneously, and the specific terrible intimacy of two people who'd shared something formative, and then been separated before they'd finished growing into who they were. Marco had developed a sudden intense interest in a point approximately 40 feet to the left of the two of them. "Luffy thinks you're dead," Ace said. "I know," he cried. Ace's jaw was tight. He cried for a long time. "I know," Sabo said. And something in his voice when he said it was not the controlled flatness of earlier. It was the sound of a wound that had been living with him for 11 years and had never fully closed. because there was a version of Luffy's grief that he carried as a weight that no amount of purpose had entirely lifted. Ace was quiet for another long moment. The sea moved between the ships, cold and indifferent, and doing its job. "Get on this ship," Ace said finally. The inside of the striker was compact and entirely Ace. Things were everywhere and also somehow organized, the organization apparent only to its architect. Maps with notes in handwriting that was aggressive and slightly too large for the space available. A logbook with dates and coordinates. A coat hung on a hook with the precision of something that mattered. They sat across from each other at the small table. Marco had made himself extremely absent with the quiet grace of someone with excellent social intelligence. Koala had stayed on the transport ship for the same reason, which Sabo had been grateful for. This was a room that only had space for two kinds of people right now. Sabo put the intelligence bulletin on the table. Not as a distraction, as a statement of why he was here, of the particular urgency that had brought him across the new world in bad weather. Ace looked at it. He read it without picking it up, leaning over it, his face going through several private things. "You've been tracking this," he said. "For weeks," Sabo said. "The pattern of Blackbeard's movements, he's not running from you. He's not trying to avoid the confrontation. He's choosing the terrain. Building towards something." Ace looked up. "I know he's dangerous. You know he's a traitor and a murderer," Sabo said. "That's not the same thing. Dangerous and personal are different problems, and right now you're treating them as one problem." He kept his voice level, not talking down to Ace, talking to him, the way you talk to someone whose ability you respected and whose blind spot you could see from outside. Teach murdered someone who mattered to you. That makes the chase feel like justice. But Teach planned that murder. He chose his target, chose his timing, chose to wake up on the ship where no fighting was supposed to happen. Someone who plans that carefully is not someone you approach from emotion. Ace was very still. "Are you telling me to let it go?" "I'm telling you to not get yourself killed," Sabo said. "Which is a different thing." "I don't need you to." Ace started with heat. "I know you don't need me to," Sabo said. "I'm doing it anyway. That's what brothers are." He paused. "You know that. You did it for Luffy constantly. Every stupid thing Luffy charged into, you were 2 steps behind ready to pull him out." Something in Ace's expression broke slightly. "Not all the way, nothing in Ace went all the way at once, it happened in pieces, but a piece of it." "You know about Luffy's crew," Ace said. "He's heading for the Grand Line," Sabo said. "Bounty of 30 million. Same as yours was." Ace almost smiled. It was the first thing that looked like Ace, the Ace from the forest, from the gray terminal, from the sake cups. He muttered. "He would," Sabo agreed. "He's heading into everything. You know how he is." "Yeah." And now the almost smile was real, complicated and warm and aching. "Yeah, I know." "Which means," Sabo said, "that both of us have reasons to still be alive when he gets there." Ace looked at him. The full weight of 11 years on both sides of the table, and neither of them identical to the children who'd parted in the forest, and also exactly the same in every way that mattered. "You're not what I expected," Ace said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. I expected." He stopped, considered. "I thought about you as you were. 10 years old, trying to go to sea." He looked at Sabo with something that was trying to locate a word. "You're not that." "No," Sabo said. "You're..." Ace made a gesture that was somewhere between frustrated and impressed. "You're the chief of staff of the Revolutionary Army. You walked into a square with 40 Marines." "Koala tells everyone that story," Sabo said. "Koala told Marco. Marco told me 5 minutes ago," Ace said. And there it was, the grin, the real one, sharp and quick, the one Sabo had been carrying in his memory for 11 years, and that was exactly right. "You're insane. 60 to 75% confident," Sabo said. "Depending on the variable." Ace laughed. It was short and surprised, the laugh of someone who hadn't expected to be laughing and didn't have time to stop it, and it was the best thing Sabo had heard in 11 years. The table between them was still there. The 11 years were still there. The grief that Ace had been carrying, the choice that Sabo had made, none of that went anywhere. But laughter was a door, and they'd opened it, and that was something. The intelligence, Sabo said, when the moment settled. Blackbeard is moving toward Banero Island. The pattern points there, it's the logical terminus of his current route. If you're going to find him, that's where it happens. Ace's expression went serious again, fast. You track this? Koala and I. Yes. Whitebeard's intelligence hasn't pinpointed. Whitebeard's intelligence is comprehensive, but it's not looking at Blackbeard's movement as an intentional pattern. Sabo said. They're tracking him reactively. We've been projecting forward. He tapped the bulletin. Banero Island. And Ace. He stopped. Ace met his eyes. Don't go alone, Sabo said. The silence that followed was specific. He could feel Ace's resistance to this. It wasn't stubbornness exactly, it was something more principled, the code that the Whitebeard crew ran on, the idea that there were things a man handled himself. He understood it. He even respected it. And he wasn't going to let it stand. You dying doesn't settle anything, Sabo said. It doesn't honor Thatch. It doesn't protect Whitebeard. It doesn't. He stopped. The next part was harder. Luffy and I don't get you back, he said. That's it. That's the whole argument. We don't get you back. Ace looked at the table. His jaw worked. He breathed in and out through his nose, a long, slow breath. I won't go alone, he said. It came out quiet, and Sabo heard what it cost him, and didn't diminish that cost by acting like it was an easy thing. Thank you, Sabo said. Don't thank me, Ace said. It's annoying. Dragon says the same thing. Ace looked at him with a very particular expression. You and the most wanted man in the world, he said. He's a good teacher, Sabo said. Does he know you're here? Chasing me down in the new world? Sabo took a small breath. He will, he said. Ace stared at him for a beat, and then the grin was back, wider this time, the real version, the one from the forest. You went rogue on the Revolutionary Army to find me, he said. It wasn't a question. I made an independent operational judgment, Sabo said. You absolutely went rogue. The outcome will justify the decision. That's... Ace pointed at him. That's exactly what Luffy sounds like. Sabo opened his mouth and closed it. He wasn't sure if that was an insult or a compliment, and suspected it was most accurately described as either and both, which was where Luffy usually lived. I'll take it, he said. They talked through the night. Not structured, not strategic. They'd done the strategy, that was handled. This was the other thing, the thing that 11 years of separation had to partially make up for in one long conversation on a small ship in the New World while the storm tracked away south and the stars came in overhead. Ace talked about Whitebeard, not the legend, the man. The way the old man moved through his ship, the weight of his attention, the specific way he made people feel seen and belonging to something. He talked about the Whitebeard pirates the way Sabo had sometimes, carefully, talked about the Revolutionary Army, as a found family, a chosen thing, something that fit in a way that assigned categories never had. Sabo talked about Dragon. About the first year of learning to fight, about Koala, about the West Blue operations, about the first time he'd read a full intelligence report on the world government's internal correspondence and understood with complete clarity that the route went all the way to the Foundation, that this wasn't a broken system that could be fixed at the margins but a system working exactly as designed. For exactly the people it was designed for. Ace listened to this with the absorbed attention of someone who'd reached the same conclusions from a different direction and was now comparing notes. He knows, Ace said. Whitebeard knows it too. His way of being in the world doesn't look like Dragon's way. Different methods, same diagnosis, Sabo said. Yeah. Ace turned his cup around in his hands. What happens when Luffy gets there? Into all of it? He does what Luffy does, Sabo said. He crashes through the middle of everything and somehow comes out the other side having made friends with half the people who tried to kill him. He paused. And he'll need us. He always needed us, Ace said. No, Sabo said, with a precision that made Ace look at him. Luffy never needed anyone to survive. He manages that himself, somehow. He needs us for the other thing. The thing survival isn't enough for. He thought about how to say it. He needs us to remind him what he's fighting for rather than just against. He needs people who knew him before the world started having opinions about him. Ace was quiet for a long moment. The ship moved gently in the calmed sea. You've been thinking about this, he said. About all three of us. For 11 years, Sabo said. Even when you were, Ace gestured vaguely. Running operations, training, building, especially then, Sabo said. It was what the building was for. Ace set his cup down. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He breathed in and out, and when he looked up his face had gone to a place that was past the anger and past the grief and past the recrimination, and was something more fundamental, something that Sabo recognized because he'd been carrying the same thing. I miss you, Ace said. Flat and plain, stripped of everything decorative. I miss you too, Sabo said. Equally plain. They sat in that for a moment, letting it be what it was, not rushing past it. Luffy's going to lose his mind when he finds out you're alive, Ace said. Probably, Sabo said. He'll cry first. Then be furious. Yes. Then hug you until your ribs break. My ribs have already been broken, Sabo said. They're structurally familiar with the experience. Ace laughed again, and this time it wasn't surprised. It was easy, the laugh of someone finding their footing. You're really the chief of staff, he said. Dragon just let a 10-year-old kid into the Revolutionary Army. He fished me out of the ocean first, Sabo said. Felt obligated, I think. And then you just stayed. The work mattered. He paused. Matters. It still does. I'm not. I haven't given up the revolution to come find you. I'm doing both. He looked at Ace directly. That's the thing I need you to understand. I'm not choosing between you and the world. You're part of why the world has to change. You and Luffy are the most concrete reason I have. Ace held his gaze. Something settled in him, visibly, not everything. There was still the grief and the anger that would need more than one night. But something settled. The narrow island, Ace said. Yes. I'm taking Marco, Ace said. And you? He said the last part as if he'd decided it while he was saying it, and had no intention of being argued with. Sabo looked at him. I wasn't planning to let you go without me, he said. I know, Ace said. I saw that from the beginning. The grin again. You're exactly as infuriating as I remembered. You're exactly as stubborn, Sabo said. Good, Ace said. Yes, Sabo agreed. Good. Outside, the New World Sea had gone dark and quiet and full of stars, and two brothers sat on a small ship that smelled like wood and engine oil and someone's half-eaten dinner, and the distance between the forest and here was enormous and irrelevant in equal measure, and the horizon waited in every direction with the same patient, absolute promise it always had. Tomorrow they would plan. Tomorrow there would be maps and routes and the hard, precise work of getting ready for something dangerous. But tonight was for this, for the undeniable, structural fact of each other, which was something no distance, and no years and no world had managed to touch. Chapter 4. Brothers in Fire. Banero Island had a town on it. That was the first surprise. Sabo had expected the kind of place you chose for a confrontation, remote, defensible, empty of witnesses. Instead, Banero was inhabited, a modest fishing community built around a harbor that smelled like salt and wood smoke and the morning catch. The buildings were old but maintained, the kind of town that had learned to be self-sufficient simply because nobody important had ever paid enough attention to it to offer anything else. Children ran between the market stalls. Boats moved in and out of the harbor with the comfortable rhythm of a place that had been doing exactly this for generations. Blackbeard had chosen it deliberately, Sabo was certain of that. A town meant witnesses. Witnesses meant a story got told. And the story Blackbeard wanted told was specific. "He's performing," Sabo said, standing on the deck of the striker as Bonero's harbor came into view. "This isn't just about fighting Ace. He wants an audience." Marco was beside him, arms folded, reading the harbor with the kind of attention that came from 15 years of New World navigation. "Why?" he said. Not challenging the assessment, genuinely asking. "Because after this, whatever happens, the story spreads. Blackbeard fought the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard pirates in a populated town. On Whitebeard's territory." Sabo watched the harbor. "He's sending a message to the whole New World. He wants them to know he doesn't fear Whitebeard." Marco was quiet for a moment. "You're saying this was never just about evading capture?" "It was never about evading capture at all," Sabo said. "Ace has been chasing him. He could have lost Ace a dozen times. He didn't. He let himself be followed here." He paused. "Teach wants this fight." From behind them, Ace's voice. "Good. Because he's going to get it." He was leaning against the mast, arms crossed, wearing the hat and the expression of someone who had made peace with the decision. He'd slept 4 hours, which Sabo knew because he'd been awake for most of the night going over the intelligence files again, and 4 hours was apparently sufficient for Ace because he'd woken looking clear-eyed and functional and faintly furious in the steady, controlled way of a man who'd converted his grief into fuel. "You've heard everything I said," Sabo said. "I heard you," Ace said. "Teach wants to fight. So do I. The difference is I know what I'm walking into. Knowing what you're walking into and being prepared for it aren't, Sabo." Ace looked at him directly. "I'm not going in angry. I'm not going in blind. I promise you that." He pushed off the mast and came to stand beside him, looking at the harbor. "But I am going in. That's not changing." Sabo looked at his brother. The set of his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes. He thought about the argument he could still make, the strategic one, the one about timing, the one about how Blackbeard's devil fruit made him uniquely dangerous in ways even the intelligence didn't fully capture. He had that argument, and it was good, and Ace had already heard it, and it wasn't going to move him because the thing keeping Ace on this course wasn't ignorance. It was principle. And you couldn't argue someone out of a principle by pointing at facts. You could only go with them. "Then we go in smart," Sabo said. "Yeah," Ace said. "Marco covers the western approach. If Blackbeard tries to use the town, the buildings, civilians, Marco's the response. I'm with you on the main." He looked at Ace. "At the start. If it becomes a one-on-one, I'll tell you," Ace said. "I'm not going to be stupid about it." "Define stupid," Marco said pleasantly. Ace pointed at him. "You're not helpful." "I'm extremely helpful," Marco said. "I'm the one who knows how to regenerate while. Maybe I should be the one going in front." "Nobody's going in front," Sabo said. "We go together, we assess on contact, and we make decisions based on what's actually happening rather than what we plan for." He looked at both of them. "The plan is, be smarter than him." "That's it. That's the whole plan." Marco looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who'd been doing New World operations for 15 years and had several things to say about plans that simple. He chose not to say any of them. "Where do you think he is?" he said instead. Sabo pointed toward the eastern edge of the town, where the buildings thinned and an open plaza bordered the tree line. "There. It's the only space large enough to fight in without immediately destroying the populated center. He's there, or he will be soon." He paused. "He knows we're coming. He let us come." They took the harbor's eastern dock and moved through the town's morning activity with the specific purposeful unhurry of people who didn't want to start a panic. The townspeople read them well enough, 3 strangers moving with that quality of intent, one of them with fire flickering at his fingers and another who stood very still in the way that enormously capable people sometimes stood. People found other places to be. The plaza was exactly where Sabo had projected. Open cobblestone, a dry fountain at the center, the tree line on three sides. Morning light coming in flat and gold from the east, which would be in their eyes until the sun moved. Blackbeard was sitting on the edge of the fountain. He was bigger than the intelligence reports suggested, not taller, but present in a way the physical descriptions didn't fully account for. He had the quality of something that took up more space than its dimensions technically required. He was eating something from a bag, relaxed, and he looked up when they entered the plaza with the expression of a man who'd been waiting and found the wait entirely agreeable. "Ace," he said warmly, as if they were old friends. "And you brought company." His eyes moved to Sabo. They stayed there for a moment. "Don't know you." "Sabo," Sabo said. "Sabo." Teach turned it over. "I've heard that name somewhere." He didn't seem troubled by not immediately placing it. "Revolutionary, maybe?" "Among other things," Sabo said. Teach stood up from the fountain's edge, unhurried, the bag of food set aside with a kind of domesticity that was deliberately dissonant with everything else about the situation. He was looking at Ace now. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come. Part of me thought you might listen to your old man and stay home. Whitebeard isn't someone I ignore," Ace said. "But this isn't his business to handle." "No," Teach agreed. He sounded genuinely pleased. "It's yours." He spread his hands, a gesture that was almost hospitable. "So, here we are." "Here we are," Ace said. Sabo watched Teach while Ace spoke. He was doing the thing he always did in the first seconds of a confrontation, reading the body, the weight distribution, where the attention actually was versus where it appeared to be. Teach was watching Ace with the focused pleasure of someone executing a plan that was proceeding well. He wasn't worried about Marco. He was curious about Sabo, but curiosity wasn't concern. He was not, Sabo noted, performing any of the unconscious preparation that people did before a fight they were uncertain about. No tension at the shoulders, no subtle shift in weight. He was as relaxed as he looked. Which was either supreme confidence or a specific kind of danger that looked like confidence and was actually something worse. "Before this starts," Sabo said. Teach looked at him. "The yami yami no mi," Sabo said. "Darkness fruit. Logia type, but different. It doesn't make you into the element, it draws things in. Gravity and void. You can't be hit normally, but you can also cancel other devil fruit users' abilities on contact." He was watching Teach's face while he said this. Something shifted in it, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. He hadn't expected the specifics to be known. The disadvantage is that you take full damage from physical hits. More damage than a normal person, because the darkness amplifies incoming force as well as exerting it. A silence. "Someone's done their reading," Teach said. His voice had lost the warmth. "Someone's been doing it for weeks," Sabo said. He looked at Ace. "Don't let him grab you. Distance or close, no middle range. And fire against darkness is still fire. He can nullify the fruit on contact, but he has to make contact first." Ace nodded once. "Tight, focused." Teach looked between them with an expression that was reassessing the situation and wasn't entirely pleased with what the reassessment produced. Then he smiled, a different smile than the warmth from before, something that showed more of what was actually underneath. "The Revolutionary Army's been studying me," he said. "Interesting. And you came all this way to share notes." He looked at Sabo with what was either appreciation or something that looked exactly like it. "Smart boy. The smartest thing I did today was come here with 2 other people," Sabo said. And then Ace moved. The first 30 seconds were fire and darkness, and the specific chaos of power at a scale that most confrontations never reached. Ace came in with Heiken, the fire fist, full commitment, the kind of attack that settled questions about whether you were serious. The fire hit the wave of darkness that Teach raised, and the two forces met with a sound like the world arguing with itself, concussive, pressure changing. The cobblestones around the point of impact cracked in a ring. The dry fountain exploded sideways. Sabo moved the moment Ace moved. Not toward Teach, perpendicular, fast, circling wide. He had the pipe in his hand and he was reading the field the way he'd been trained to read fields, exits, angles, the way Teach's attention tracked, where the darkness expanded and where it pulled back. Teach was smiling. The impact hadn't moved him meaningfully. He was letting the fire break against the darkness with the ease of something that had expected this and found it sufficient. Better than most, he said to Ace, conversationally, like they were sparring rather than fighting. You're really one of Whitebeard's best. I can see why the old man values you. Ace sent 3 more fireballs in fast succession, varying the angles. Teach's darkness swept them aside, pulling them in and extinguishing them, not dispersing but consuming, which was what made it different from a standard Logia. It didn't deflect. It devoured. Marco had come around from the western approach. He wasn't engaging yet. Sabo had told him assess first, and Marco was a 1st Division commander for a reason. He was watching, positioning, being the option that hadn't been used yet. Sabo came in from Teach's left. Not with the pipe first, with movement. He'd spent 11 years learning what happened when you moved correctly, and what happened was that the correct movement made everything else work without as much force. He was inside Teach's peripheral range before the man registered the approach, and the pipe came up not as a strike but as a redirect, catching the outer edge of the darkness expansion and using its own outward force to push Sabo's trajectory rather than fighting it. He went over and passed and came down with the pipe driving downward at Teach's shoulder. It connected. The darkness flared and the impact was wrong, heavier than it should have been, the amplification he described to Ace working both ways, his own strike hitting harder than his arm expected. He felt it up through the pipe into his hands and let the momentum carry him clear rather than holding the position. Teach had moved. Barely, a roll of the shoulder, absorbing, but he moved, and his expression had changed. That's an interesting style, Teach said. Something in his voice was different now. Not warm, not performative. Actual attention. It gets better, Sabo said. Ace hit him from the right with a column of fire that Teach hadn't fully tracked because his attention was on Sabo, and this time the darkness didn't expand fast enough and the fire caught the edge of it, and Teach took a portion of the impact directly. He staggered. 1 step, 2, physical damage going in clean, the way Sabo had calculated. He recovered fast, faster than a normal person, but the step had happened. There, Sabo said. And Ace heard the word and understood it immediately because they talked through this pattern 3 times on the ship last night, and that was the thing about fighting alongside people you trusted, you didn't need long explanations in the middle of it. They fell into rotation. Ace pushing with fire, drawing the darkness expansion, Sabo coming in from angles that were only available because the darkness was occupied elsewhere. It wasn't clean. Teach was too capable and too experienced for anything to be clean. The darkness had reach and variability, and it changed directions faster than anything that large should. Sabo took a grazing hit that picked him up and deposited him 4 feet to the left of where he'd been standing, and he rolled with it, and came up and shook it out of his vision, and kept moving. Marco came in when Teach tried to use the darkness as a sustained grab, an expansion designed to swallow Ace's fire at the source and make contact. Marco's phoenix form hit the darkness from above, the blue fire that healed as it burned carving through the outer edge, and Teach had to abandon the expansion and redirect, and in that redirect Ace had a clear lane and Hyken went in full. The impact was enormous. Fire and darkness, and the sound of something fundamental happening at a scale the plaza was too small to contain. The cobblestones were gone, just gone, a circle of them, 30 feet across, scorched into something that used to be stone. The fountain was rubble. The tree line at the eastern edge was burning in 2 places. Teach was down on 1 knee. His coat was burned through on the right side. He was breathing hard. He was also grinning. That's the damage, he said to nobody in particular. That's actually what it does. His voice had a quality in it that was wrong in the specific way of someone experiencing something they'd been theorizing about and finding the reality better than expected. Taking full hits, every hit goes in like that. He looked at his own hand, which was shaking slightly. Fascinating. Sabo had the particular cold feeling in his stomach that came from watching someone process pain as data rather than experience. He'd felt it before, dealing with certain kinds of operators in the Revolutionary Army's intelligence work, people whose relationship to themselves was primarily instrumental. It was one of the most dangerous things a person could be. Ace, he said, keeping his voice level. He's not hurt in the way we need him to be hurt. Ace landed beside him. He was breathing harder than Sabo. He'd put enormous output into the sustained fire attack. What does that mean? He said low. It means the damage is going in, but he's not. He doesn't care about it the same way, Sabo said. He's learning. He's using this fight to calibrate his own abilities. We need to end this before he finishes calibrating. Teach stood up. Slowly, but stood. The grin was still there. The revolutionary, he said to Sabo. You're more interesting than most people I've met. What did you say your name was again? Sabo? Yes, Sabo said. Chief of Staff, Teach said. He placed it now. Sabo could see the recognition landing. Dragon's right hand. You're a long way from home. Not really, Sabo said. My brothers are here. Teach looked at him. Looked at Ace. Something moved through his expression, a recalculation, and then a specific kind of decision. Brothers, he said. Interesting word choice. He raised one hand, and the darkness gathered around it in a concentrated mass that was qualitatively different from what he'd been using before, denser, with a gravitational pull that Sabo could feel from 20 feet away as a pressure against his skin. Let's see what the brothers can do. It came out fast and dark and aimed at Ace. Sabo was already moving. Not because he'd predicted the exact moment, he hadn't, but because he'd been positioned for the response since Teach stood up, the same way you were positioned for the response before you knew what response would be needed. He got between the darkness and Ace with a half-second to spare, drove the pipe into the concentrated mass at its narrowest point, which was wrong. He'd never done this before, and the force that came back through the pipe and into his arms was spectacular and awful, and redirected. Not fully. He didn't have the leverage for full redirection. He moved it maybe 30 degrees off its original line, and it blew past him, and took out a section of the tree line instead of Ace. He was on his knees. Both arms were vibrating from the impact, a deep bone vibration that was going to be extremely painful later. He made a note of this and set it aside. Sabo! Ace was there, hand on his shoulder. I'm fine, he said. He was mostly fine. He got up. Teach was watching him with an expression that was close to something like respect, which on Teach looked like a variety of threat assessment. You redirected that, he said. With a pipe. It's a good pipe, Sabo said. Behind Teach, Marco had come in again from above, and this time instead of striking he'd landed on the ground, Phoenix adjacent in stance, blue fire at his hands, and the quality of the triangle they'd formed, Ace, Sabo, Marco at 3 points with Teach at the center, had changed the geometry of the fight in a way that Teach was now registering. 3-on-1, Teach said. We weren't hiding that, Ace said. Teach looked at the three of them. The darkness had settled back around him in a neutral configuration, not attacking, not defending, just present. His coat was ruined. His breathing had steadied. He was thinking, which was the most dangerous state for him to be in. This isn't over, he said. No, Ace agreed. But it's enough for today. The word today landed with a meaning that was slightly larger than the sentence. Sabo heard it. It was the word of someone who understood this fight had an afterward, that whatever happened here wasn't the full story. Teach heard it too. He looked at Ace for a long moment, and the grin returned, different again, this time with something in it that was almost anticipatory. Today, he repeated. He picked up his coat from where it had landed during the fight, examined the burned section without visible distress, and looked back at Ace. "Tell the old man I said hello?" He walked toward the tree line. Not running, walking. The darkness gathered around him, and he stepped into the trees and was gone with the specific finality of someone who had gotten what they came for. The plaza was silent. What was left of the plaza? They stood in the wreckage of the cobblestones while the smoke from the tree line drifted overhead, and a cat, apparently the only Bonero Island resident with no survival instinct, picked its way through the rubble toward the remains of the fountain. Marcos sat down on a piece of former cobblestone and looked at his own hands. They were fine, they were always fine, that was the nature of regeneration, but he had the expression of someone mentally filing a thorough report. "That was," he said, and then appeared to decide no single word was adequate, and left the sentence there. "He let us win the exchange," Sabo said. His arms had progressed from vibrating to a deep, instructive ache. He rotated his shoulders carefully. Everything worked, which was the important part. "I know," Ace said. He was still standing, looking at the tree line where Teach had gone. His fire had gone out, not extinguished, just resting, the way emotions went quiet after they'd been fully expressed. "He came here to test himself. Test us." A pause. Test what the darkness could actually do against other powers. "And now he has that data," Sabo said. "And now he has that data," Ace confirmed. He turned away from the tree line. He looked at Sabo, at his arms, at the careful way he was holding his shoulders. "You're hurt." "Functionally operational," Sabo said. "That's not, it's what I've got right now," Sabo said. "I'll be better by tonight." Ace looked at him for a moment with something that was working out how to be a brother to someone who was now fully grown and had been operational in dangerous situations for a decade and still clearly needed someone to tell him to take care of his arms properly. He came forward, looked at Sabo's hands, the knuckles, which had taken the worst of the pipe's feedback force, and made a sound that was not quite words. "You redirected a concentrated darkness attack," Marco said from his rock. "With a pipe." "I've mentioned the pipe is good," Sabo said. "What style is that?" "Because it's not any style I've seen, and I've seen most of them." "It's mine," Sabo said. He flexed his fingers. They responded reluctantly, but they responded. "I put it together from a few different things." "He does that," Ace said. He said it to Marco but was looking at Sabo, and the way he said it, simply, with an undercurrent of something warm and old, was the tone of someone who knew you and was saying so without announcement. Sabo looked at his brother. The sun had moved while they'd been fighting, and the light was different now, higher, cleaner, the flat gold replaced by the clear, direct light of mid-morning. Ace looked tired and undefeated, which was also exactly who he was. "He'll be more dangerous next time," Sabo said. "I know. The data he took from this fight, I know," Ace said again, not cutting him off but settling it. "I know it, Sabo. I walked in knowing this wasn't the end." He looked away, at the ruined plaza, at the cat who had reached the fountain's rubble and was sitting on it with complete monarchical indifference. "I'm not going back to Whitebeard empty-handed, though. This happened. He knows we can find him. He knows we can hit him." A pause. "He knows you're in it. That last one might be a problem," Marco said. "Or an advantage," Sabo said. "He's curious about me. Curious is workable." He thought about it. "He's going to go after a Shichibukai position," he said. "The Shichibukai are the next logical step for his pattern. It gives him world government protection and legitimacy without requiring him to actually operate within their authority. And to get a position, he needs to demonstrate sufficient threat level to be worth the government's cooperation." Ace looked at him. "Meaning?" "Meaning the next move isn't here," Sabo said. "The next move is him building his own crew into something that can't be ignored. And the way you build that in the new world is by taking on targets that prove your strength." He looked at Ace. "He's going to go after someone. A major target. And the most valuable target he can acquire isn't a bounty or a ship. It's a person. The silence had a weight in it. They both knew what kind of person held that kind of value to someone building toward the top of the new world. I need to tell Dragon, Sabo said. He said it not as an apology for what he'd done without authorization, but as a statement of what needed to happen next. The army needs to be watching Teach's trajectory. Not to stop him, we don't have the positioning for that yet, but to track him. When he makes his move, it needs to be in a report we already have context for. And I need to tell Whitebeard, Ace said. Yes. They looked at each other. A beat of something that wasn't goodbye. They just found each other. Either of them would give it a word that heavy, but the acknowledgement that what came next pulled in two directions. You're going back to Dragon, Ace said. For now, Sabo said. And then? And then I'm going wherever I need to be, Sabo said. Which is going to be wherever both of you are, with some frequency. He said it the way he'd said things to Dragon for 11 years, not as a request, as a fact. Ace looked at him. He was 20 years old and had 550 million berry on his head and commanded a division of the most powerful crew on the sea, and he looked, for just a moment, like the boy in the forest who had decided without fully understanding why that this specific person was worth trusting. Yeah, he said. Same. Marco stood up from his rock and stretched, massively, with the unhurried physical comfort of someone whose body never stayed damaged. He looked at both of them with the expression he'd had for most of the night on the striker, the one that knew it was witnessing something with history. I'm going to go check on the town, he said. Make sure nobody needs anything. He paused. Iwa. He went, and the two brothers stood in the wrecked plaza with the cat and the rubble and the smoke trailing from the tree line, and the new world air moved around them with its opinions and its weight, and its particular quality of taking things seriously. Luffy's going to be in the Grand Line soon, Ace said. I know. He's going to find trouble. He always finds trouble, Sabo said. And he's always fine. You can say that, Ace said. You haven't seen what kind of trouble the Grand Line produces. Sabo looked at him. You think he can handle it? Ace opened his mouth. Closed it. No, he said, and the word had both exasperation and enormous, complete conviction in it simultaneously. I think he can handle anything. I just think I should be there to watch. Then we make sure you're there to watch, Sabo said. Ace nodded. He looked at the harbor, where the striker sat at the eastern dock and the town was starting to cautiously reassert its normal rhythms around the edges of what had happened. I meant what I said on the ship, Ace said. About missing you. I know, Sabo said. Good. He started toward the dock. And Sabo. Sabo fell into step beside him. Yes. When you talk to Dragon, Ace said, I want to be there. Sabo looked at him. Dragon doesn't do. I know what Dragon does and doesn't do, Ace said pleasantly. I want to be there. For the part where he tells you that you went rogue on the Revolutionary Army, and you explain to him why it was the right call. He glanced sideways at Sabo. I want to watch you explain it. That's... Sabo paused. That's not a good enough reason. I have other reasons, Ace said. I want to talk to him about Blackbeard. I want the Army's intelligence on Teach's full history. And... a pause. He's been keeping you alive and functional for 11 years. I have opinions about that. Sabo looked at his brother for a moment. What kind of opinions? The kind where I want to look at the man who raised my brother, Ace said simply. And make sure I know who he is. Sabo said nothing for a few steps. The harbor was close now, the striker visible, the transport ship beside it with Koala visible on the deck. She was watching their approach with the specific attention she gave to situations she'd been tracking from a distance, and was assessing the outcome of. He'll say yes, Sabo said finally. To the meeting. He considered how to say it. He understands what matters. Good, Ace said. They reached the dock. Koala looked at Sabo's arms with the expression she'd been perfecting for 11 years, The one that communicated I can tell you're injured and I'm assessing severity, and I'm going to have opinions about it later. She looked at Ace. She looked at Marco, who had appeared from the direction of the town at a comfortable pace, apparently satisfied with the town's status. Well? She said. Blackbeard's alive, Sabo said. He fought, he learned what he wanted, he left. He walked away. She looked at Ace. He walked away, Ace confirmed. Koala absorbed this. And you let him. We didn't have what we needed to stop him cleanly, Sabo said. A harder press with the information gap we had would have been expensive. She held his eyes for a moment, checking whether expensive meant what she thought it meant. She decided it did. She looked at his arms again. What happened? Redirected a concentrated darkness attack, Marco said helpfully, from the dock behind them. Koala turned to look at Marco. Then at the pipe at Sabo's belt. Then at Sabo's hands. Her expression completed its journey from assessment to conclusion. With the pipe, she said. It's a good pipe, Sabo said. She breathed in through her nose. Out through her mouth. The measured exhale that meant she had 17 things to say and had decided to say none of them right now. Get on the boat, she said. I'll look at your hands. He got on the boat. She was already reaching for the medical kit before he'd sat down, efficient and precise, her attention on his hands but her awareness of the whole situation clear in the way she positioned herself. Where Ace was, where Marco was, what the harbor looked like, all of it registered and catalogued. Sabo looked at his hands while she worked. The knuckles were bruised deep and the feedback damage had done something unpleasant to the tendons of his right hand, but the movement was intact and the pain was the kind that faded rather than worsened. He would be fine. He looked up. Ace had come aboard and was standing at the prow, looking back at Bonero Island. The town, the harbor, the tree line where the smoke had finally thinned to nothing. The cat was probably still on the fountain rubble. Sabo, Koala said quietly, focused on his hand. Yes. Was it worth it? She wasn't asking about the fight. She was asking about the broader thing. The unauthorized operation, the new world run, the choice made without Dragon's sanction. He looked at Ace's back. At the set of his shoulders, which had a different quality now than they'd had on the striker that first night, something resolved in them that hadn't been there before. Not everything. Grief didn't resolve in one night and one fight. But something. Yes, Sabo said. She tied off the bandaging with a precision that was slightly more firm than medically necessary. Then Dragon's going to say the same thing, she said. Eventually. After the part where he tells me I went rogue. After that part, she agreed. She looked at his hands, satisfied with the work. Both hands usable? He made a fist with each. It hurt in the specific bearable way of well-bandaged damage. Yes. Good. She stood up and went back to the charts without ceremony, because ceremony had never been part of what they did, and the boat had places to be. The striker moved away from the dock first, heading northwest toward the Moby Dick and everything that came next. Sabo watched it go, watched Ace at the prow, until the distance between the ships grew and the striker became smaller and smaller against the enormous New World sea. He didn't look away until it was just a shape on the horizon. Then a suggestion. Then nothing but open water. The sea was very blue and very full of the particular promise of things still in motion. Chapter 5. Marie Ford. The day that didn't break. The notification came through 3 revolutionary channels simultaneously, which meant it was real. Sabo was in Dragon's headquarters on Baltigo when the Den Mushy started going. He was in the middle of a debrief. Dragon across the table, Koala to his left, 2 senior commanders standing at the maps along the east wall. He'd been explaining his decision-making process around the brass water extraction and the unauthorized New World operation in the precise, thorough way he always explained things to Dragon, which was the same way he'd been explaining things to Dragon for 12 years, completely, without omission, and without apology for the conclusions he'd reached. Dragon had listened to all of it without interruption. He'd looked at the Bonero Island report. He looked at the Blackbird intelligence projection. He'd been quiet in the way he was quiet when he was building a complete picture from pieces and wasn't finished yet. Then the den mushy went off. The operator outside the room answered. A pause. Then the operator's voice, very controlled. Commander. Priority 1. Dragon picked up the secondary unit on the table. Listened. His face did nothing. It rarely did. Dragon's face was the most disciplined face Sabo had ever studied, but something in his posture changed. A settling, like a structure finding its load. He set the unit down. Portgasti, Ace has been captured, Dragon said. By Blackbird, who turned him over to the Marines. The world government has announced a public execution at Marineford. He paused. In 3 days. The room was very quiet. Sabo looked at the table. He looked at the grain of the wood, the map underneath Dragon's hands, the lamp that hung at a practical angle casting its practical light. He did this for approximately 2 seconds while his mind ran the situation, and his chest did something enormous and structural that he set aside because there was no time for it yet. Blackbird used the capture to obtain a Shichibukai position, he said. His voice was steady. Yes, Dragon said. He planned it from Bonero, Sabo said. He needed Ace specifically, the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. High enough value to negotiate the position. Personal enough to use as bait for Whitebeard. He stood up. Whitebeard will move. The Marines are expecting it, Dragon said. The announcement is designed to draw Whitebeard out. They want the confrontation. They want to kill them both in one place, Koala said. She was very still. Yes, Dragon said. Sabo picked up his coat from the back of his chair. He didn't put it on yet, he held it, because his hands needed something to do while the rest of him organized. Whitebeard's fleet against the full marine force at their strongest position, he said. Sengoku is intelligent. He'll have admirals there. All 3, probably. He thought through the layout of Marineford. He'd studied its defensive architecture 2 years ago as part of a broader world government installation project. The bay configuration gives the Marines the angle advantage against a sea approach. Whitebeard will lose ships before anyone sets foot on land. Sabo, Dragon said. He looked at Dragon. The Revolutionary Army's position on Marineford is, I know our position, Sabo said. Non-engagement with Marine Yonko conflicts unless revolutionary assets are directly threatened. He held Dragon's eyes. Ace is my brother. I know who Ace is, Dragon said. He said it without heat, without the particular authority voice that he used when he was closing a discussion. He said it the way he said things he'd already thought through completely. I also know what Marineford represents. 3 admirals, the full Marine headquarters force, a public execution designed to send the message that even a Yonko cannot defy the world government without consequence. He paused. If the Revolutionary Army openly engages at Marineford, we're not ready for that engagement, Sabo said. I know. I'm not asking for the army. He set the coat on the table. I'm asking for what resources can be positioned without the army's official involvement. Intelligence assets in the area? Evacuation channels? Transport. He looked at Dragon. And I'm asking you to not tell me to stay here. The room waited. Dragon looked at his son. Sabo had never called him that. Dragon had never used the word. It existed somewhere beneath the formal structure of commander and chief of staff and hadn't needed to be named to be real. And something in Dragon's expression did the brief, almost imperceptible thing it sometimes did, the thing that looked like feeling and was gone before it could be labeled. Koala goes with you, Dragon said. Hack. Sura. Whatever positioning we have in the East Blue Corridor. He looked at the map. There are 3 revolutionary transport ships within 30 hours of Marineford. They move now, no flags, civilian configuration. Thank you, Sabo said. Don't thank me, Dragon said. Come back. It was the first time he'd said it. In 12 years of operations, of dangerous assignments, of Sabo walking into situations that had no guaranteed exit, Dragon had never said come back. He gave the instruction now without apparent self-consciousness, the way he gave all his instructions, as a fact that he expected to be honored. Sabo picked up his coat. I will, he said. 31 hours later, Marineford came into view. The scale of it hit you before the details did. The Marine headquarters was not built to impress, it was built to overwhelm, which was different and more honest. The walls were enormous, the cannons on them numerous, the fleet arrayed in the bay a statement about organized force that had no ambiguity in it. The scaffold at the center of the execution plaza was visible from 2 miles out, which was the point. You were supposed to see it from 2 miles out. Sabo stood at the prow of the lead transport ship and looked at it with the cold, clear attention he brought to intelligence work, cataloging every position, every angle, every gap in the formation. The 2 other revolutionary transports had come in during the night and were positioned at the edge of the bay's civilian vessel zone, boats that had reason to be near Marineford during a public event, keeping to their lanes, flying nothing identifiable. Whitebird's fleet had arrived first. The Moby Dick was in the bay. The other ships of the fleet were behind it, and from this distance they were still an abstraction, large shapes in the water, but the quality of the scene below the walls of Marineford had already changed in the way a room changes when something enormous and potentially catastrophic is about to happen. The Marines knew Whitebird was there. They'd expected him. The bay's configuration was already working against the fleet. He could see the angle from here, the geometry that forced any sea approach into the Marine cannon range before it could get its own angles on the walls. War, Koala said beside him. Not dramatically. Just naming what they were looking at. Yes, Sabo said. Our people are in position? Hack confirmed 30 minutes ago. We have 7 extraction routes from the execution plaza to the sea, each one covered by at least 2 operatives. 3 of them run through the marine facility's civilian infrastructure, laundry corridors, maintenance tunnels, supply access. The Marines won't cover those in a combat configuration. He had all of this in his head rather than on paper, because paper could be captured and heads were harder to read. The problem is getting to Ace before the execution. The scaffold is in the center of the plaza, Koala said, surrounded by Marine forces. Even if Whitebird's people breach the walls, the window is narrow, Sabo said. Between the breach and when the Marines stabilize. That's the window. He looked at the scaffold. It was impossible to see Ace from this distance, but he looked at it anyway. I need to be inside the walls when the breach happens. Koala turned to look at him. Not with alarm. She was past alarm with him, had been for years, but with the focused, practical attention of someone who needed to understand exactly what she was helping with. How? The supply entrance on the eastern wall, he said. The morning supply runs for a facility this size don't stop for a public event, they accelerate, because you need to feed more people. A supply vessel goes in through the eastern gate approximately every 40 minutes. The next one goes in. He checked the angle of the sun. 20 minutes. You're going in on a supply ship, she said. I'm going in as part of a supply run, he said. Different thing. He looked at her. I need you on the outside. Coordinating the extraction routes, keeping the transports ready, managing the operatives. He paused. You're better at the coordination than I am. You're better at the coordination than most people alive, she said flatly. I'm better at being inside a situation and making decisions in real time, he said. You're better at managing 15 moving pieces simultaneously from the outside. Both things were true and they both knew it. I need both things today. She looked at him. The expression that had no name, the 11 years of trust and exasperation and partnership, and something else that they had never named because naming it would have required stopping and neither of them stopped, lived in her face for a moment. Then she breathed out. Come back, she said. It was, he noted, the same thing Dragon had said. In the same tone. He filed this as information. Yes, he said and went. Getting inside the walls of Marineford was easier than it should have been, which told him something about how the Marine Command was thinking. They were focused forward, on the bay, on Whitebeard, on the incoming conflict they'd engineered. The eastern supply entrance was moving fast and imprecisely, the usual careful documentation accelerated into something more approximate. He moved through it with a supply cart and a uniform acquired from the revolutionary operative who'd been embedded in Marineford's civilian contractor network for 8 months. Inside the walls, the scale was different again. Everything was in motion, Marine forces repositioning, officers relaying commands, the particular organized chaos of a massive military installation preparing for combat at the highest level. He moved through it with the specific quality of belonging that he'd practiced since he was 12 years old, the body language of someone who had a place here and was moving toward it purposefully. People in motion didn't look closely at other people in motion. He found a position on the upper maintenance level of the eastern wall, a walkway that gave him a view of the execution plaza below, and the bay beyond the outer walls. He could see the scaffold. He could see the Marine formation around it, heavy, layered, the positioning of a command that genuinely expected an attempt to reach it. He could see the admirals, 3 of them, positioned as he projected, the white coats making them visually unmistakable even from this height. He could see Ace. Ace was alive and standing and had the expression Sabo had seen once before, in the gray terminal, the morning before Sabo's boat was supposed to leave. The expression of someone who had decided how they felt about whatever was happening and was holding that decision with both hands. Sabo put 2 fingers in his mouth and produced a sharp, carrying whistle, 3 short, 1 long, the same signal he'd used in Brasswater. The revolutionary operative 40 feet to his left on the walkway heard it, and moved to confirm his position. 6 other signals would be moving through the Marine facility right now, the operatives confirming the network was active. Below, the war started. The first breach came from the water. Whitebeard's quake power hit the bay with a force that Sabo felt through the stone wall beneath his feet, a vibration that went up through his legs and into his spine. The water in the bay moved wrong, a massive lateral shift, and the Marine ships in formation lost their angles and the Whitebeard fleet moved through the gap with the specific purposeful violence of something that had been held back and was now released. The walls held the first assault. The cannons on the Marine side fired in coordinated rolling waves. Impressive, actually, the coordination was excellent, but Whitebeard's commanders were not people who'd reached their positions without understanding how to move through fire. The wall breach happened at the northwest corner, 2 of Whitebeard's strongest division commanders hitting the same point simultaneously, and then the Whitebeard pirates were inside the walls and everything became very loud and very complicated very fast. Sabo was already moving. Down from the maintenance walkway, through a supply corridor, out into the eastern edge of the plaza. The Marine formation around the scaffold was still intact. They'd prepared for a breach and the formation was designed to hold even with pressure from multiple directions, the inner ring around Ace staying committed regardless of what happened at the walls. Smart. It meant the execution window was being protected separately from the wall defense. He assessed the inner ring. 20 Marines, tight formation, an officer at each corner. The 2 executioners at the scaffold itself, swords drawn, waiting for the order. And a Marine vice admiral standing at the base of the scaffold with the expression of someone who would give that order regardless of what happened around him. Between Sabo and the scaffold, approximately 60 feet of open plaza and 20 committed Marines. He didn't break into a run. Running attracted attention and cohesion. He walked fast, with purpose, in the uniform, until he was close enough that the distance was irrelevant, and then he hit the formation's edge with the pipe and the 12 years of every fighting style he'd absorbed and the specific motivated clarity of someone who was not stopping. The outer ring of the formation came apart in 20 seconds. Not cleanly. He took a sword cut across his left shoulder that was more than a graze and less than a wound, and a rifle but to the ribs that would have been worse if he hadn't moved with it, and a Marine who was very good with a halberd gave him 3 full seconds of genuine difficulty before Sabo found the angle, and the halberd was somewhere else. He was through. The Vice Admiral turned. He was a large man, graying, with the settled, competent quality of someone who had risen through the Marine ranks on the basis of actual ability rather than connection. He looked at Sabo with recognition that was entirely situational. He didn't know who Sabo was, but he understood exactly what Sabo was doing and had already decided what his response was. "Stand down," the Vice Admiral said. "Not today," Sabo said. The fight with the Vice Admiral lasted longer than any individual piece of it should have, which was the nature of fighting people who were genuinely good. He was strong and experienced, and his hockey was excellent, the armament type, coating his fists with a hardness that hit differently than the raw physical power behind it. Sabo had been working on his own hockey for 3 years, pushing it from theory into the kind of automatic application that meant it was available when you needed it without the half-second of intention that a more deliberate use required. It was available now. They traded 4 exchanges, fast and hard, the Vice Admiral adjusting after each one, Sabo adjusting faster. The 5th exchange ended with the Vice Admiral stepping back from a pipe strike that had come through his hockey guard via an angle that shouldn't have had an angle, and in the step back his heel caught the scaffold's bottom step and he went to one knee. Sabo was at the scaffold before the Vice Admiral was upright. The 2 executioners turned. He didn't have time for the extended version. The pipe caught the first sword in a redirect that sent it into the second man's stance, and both of them were repositioning at the same time, and in that moment he was at the restraints. Ace looked at him. Up close, the controlled expression from a distance resolved into something more specific, relief and fury and the particular complicated emotion of someone who had spent time believing they were going to die and was now rapidly reconsidering the situation. His wrists were in sea-stone restraints that nullified the fruit. His hands were bound. There was bruising along his jaw and his shirt was torn. "You're late," Ace said. "I had to come through the Eastern Supply entrance," Sabo said. He had the restraints, sea-stone cuffs with a standard marine lock, which was designed to resist a fruit user's powers and not much else, and the pipe's tip went into the lock mechanism with precise, familiar pressure. "You came through the Eastern Supply entrance," Ace repeated, watching Sabo work the lock. "As what?" "Delivery person," Sabo said. "That's..." The lock gave. The cuffs came off. Ace's hands came free and fire was there immediately, not an attack, just the reflex of an element returning to a person who'd been separated from it, a pilot light coming back on. He flexed his fingers and looked at his hands and breathed out. "Okay," he said. "Can you move?" "Yes." He stepped off the scaffold. He was moving correctly, not injured beyond what was visible, the bruising and the torn shirt the worst of it. He looked around the plaza, reading it fast the way he always read things. "Where are we going?" "East wall, maintenance level, 3rd access corridor," Sabo said. "There's a route to the sea. Whitebeard's people are inside the walls," Ace said. He was looking at the ongoing battle, the enormous, multi-front chaos of the full engagement, Whitebeard's commanders fighting through the Marine defenders, admirals engaged at 3 points around the plaza, the whole complex roaring situation. "I need to tell Whitebeard you're alive first," Sabo said. "Tell him visually. Right now." He gestured toward the northeast where the Moby Dick's flag was visible above the wall. "Marco will see you. The signal goes through the fleet. Then we move." He held Ace's eyes. 30 seconds. Ace looked at him for a beat. Then he raised one hand and sent a column of fire straight up, not attacking, not defensive, just a flare. "Here, alive, I'm here," and held it for 3 seconds, which was enough. In the bay, the quality of the Whitebeard fleet's movement changed. Hard to articulate how, the direction didn't change, the force didn't change, but something in it clarified, like a purpose being confirmed rather than pursued. "Now we go," Ace said. The route through the eastern wall was not peaceful. 3 Marine squads had repositioned into the maintenance corridors during the wall breach, which was good tactical thinking on the Marine Command's part, and a significant inconvenience on Sabo's. He and Ace moved through two of the squads with the specific efficiency of two people who had talked through each other's fighting styles for 2 nights on a ship and had processed one another's capabilities with the thoroughness of people who cared about each other surviving. Ace covered space. Fire didn't need precision at range, it covered angles and forced positioning. Sabo handled what got close, the pipe working in the corridor-specific way that short spaces required, where the usual advantage of range didn't apply and the advantage went to whoever was better in tight geometry. They were better in tight geometry. The third squad had an officer with hockey and a tactical mind, and this one required more time. A minute, maybe a minute and a half. The corridor lit amber and orange with fire that Ace was controlling with the precision of someone who understood exactly what would happen to the structural integrity of a maintenance corridor if fire got loose in it. When it was done, Sabo's shoulder was leaking more than he'd prefer and Ace had a burn on his forearm from a redirected shot, which was the first time Sabo had seen fire from Ace's own hands mark him, and the look on Ace's face when he noticed it was briefly, fiercely focused before he set it aside and kept moving. The third access corridor opened to the eastern wall's exterior face, a narrow ledge 40 feet above the sea. The revolutionary operative who should have been there was there, pressed flat against the stone, a rope line already secured to the wall anchor. Took longer than projected, the operative said, looking at Sabo's shoulder. Complex route, Sabo said. He took the rope and looked at Ace. Down, then along the wall base to the water. There's a boat. Ace looked over the ledge at the 40-foot drop to the sea. Around them, the battle was enormous and everywhere, the sounds of it, the pressure changes from Whitebeard's quakes, the crash of cannon fire from multiple directions. That's a long way down, he said. Jump, Sabo said. They jumped. The sea hit cold and complete, the salt water going into everything including Sabo's shoulder, which expressed strong opinions. He came up fast and oriented on the wall base and started moving, Ace beside him, both of them swimming close to the wall where the sight lines from the marine positions above were worst. 30 meters 40, the revolutionary operative had gone down a different line and was already in the water ahead of them, moving toward the boat. The boat was small, fast, civilian registration, with 2 of Koala's people at the oars and Koala herself standing in the stern looking at the wall they'd just come off with the expression she reserved for situations that had resolved but were still processing. She saw them come around the wall base. She looked at Sabo's shoulder. She looked at Ace, at the bruising, at the burn on his forearm. She counted both of them, 1, 2, and something in her shoulders came down from where it had been. Get in, she said. They got in. 200 meters from the wall, still in the shadow of the outer battle's chaos, Sabo sat in the bottom of the boat with his back against the gunwale and let Koala look at his shoulder. Ace was across from him, forearm already wrapped by the second operative, looking back at Marineford. The battle was still happening. The scale of it, from water level, was even more overwhelming, the marine walls and the Whitebeard fleet and the sounds of something enormous and irreversible taking place. Sabo could see the Moby Dick in the bay, flags flying, the fleet engaged at full force. Whitebeard needs to know Ace is clear, Sabo said. He looked at the operative at the oars. Can you signal the fleet? We have mirror signal capacity, the operative said. What's the message? Ace is clear. Pull back. He paused. They won't pull back. Whitebeard isn't built for pulling back once he's committed. But they need to know the execution didn't happen. They can make their own decisions from there. The operative worked the mirror signal toward the fleet. A moment. A response from one of the Whitebeard ships, a flag signal, brief and definite. Marco, probably. He would know the revolutionary signal protocols. Sabo had sent them to Ace in a coded message 2 weeks ago. Ace was watching the fleet. He had the expression of someone watching their family fight, which was exactly what he was doing, and the specific helplessness of being on the outside of it was visible in the set of his jaw. They know, Sabo said. Ace didn't look away from the fleet. He went to war for me, he said. Yes. The old man, he brought everything. He looked at the Moby Dick, at the size of it, at everything it carried. Everyone. You're his son, Sabo said. Simply. Ace turned to look at him. Something in his face was open in a way that didn't have a cover over it right now. The battle and the scaffold and the cuffs and the 30 seconds of believing this was going to end had stripped away some of the outer layer. Are you all right? Sabo said. No, Ace said. Honest, flat, without the performance of being fine. I'll be all right. But not yet. Okay, Sabo said. Thank you, Ace said. He said it the way he said things that mattered, without the armor around it, direct. For coming. I told you in Brasswater's intelligence bulletin, Sabo said. After Banero Island. I said I was going wherever I needed to be with some frequency. He looked at Ace. This was the first instance of some frequency. Ace made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Your shoulder is bad, he said. Koala is handling it. Sabo said. Hold still. Koala said, from behind his shoulder, with the tone that meant she was at the difficult part of the process, and his commentary was not helping. He held still. The boat moved steadily away from Marineford, the battle sounds not diminishing but changing quality with distance, becoming something more like weather than specific violence. The sea was cold and the morning light was the flat, direct kind that came before noon, and the transport ships were visible ahead at the civilian vessel boundary. Luffy's in the Grand Line, Ace said. He said it the way you said something you'd been holding and needed to put down. I know. This is going to reach him, Ace said. The battle. News of the execution attempt. He looked at his hands, the fire quiet on his fingers. He's going to try to come here. Probably, Sabo said. He can't be here, Ace said. Not in the middle of. He gestured at Marineford. This is the full Marine force, Sabo. Luffy doesn't have, Luffy does what Luffy does, Sabo said. We've established this. I'm serious. So am I, Sabo said. And what I'm serious about is that Luffy is going to go wherever Luffy decides he needs to go, and the best thing we can do is make sure that when he gets there, someone who knows the situation is already present. He looked at Ace. The battle is still happening. Marco has your signal. Whitebeard knows you're clear. The fleet can act on that information. He paused. But if Luffy is coming, he's coming, Ace said. Certainty, no qualifier. Then we need to be in a position to meet him, Sabo said. Not here, not now, but if the information about the execution attempt is spreading, and if Luffy picks it up, and if he moves toward it. He thought through the timing. He's in the Grand Line. The Sabaody archipelago is the nearest major hub. That's where he'd come through. Ace looked at him. You think he'll make it to Sabaody? I think Luffy will do something completely unexpected and somehow arrive at the most important possible place at the most important possible time, Sabo said. He always does. Ace was quiet for a moment. Then, yeah. A pause. Yeah, he does. They sat in the moving boat and let the sounds of Marineford recede behind them, not gone but diminished, the battle still happening and neither of them able to stop it but both of them present for something that had not broken the way it was designed to break. The scaffold was empty. The sea-stone cuffs were in the bottom of the boat. The execution that was supposed to send the message that the world government was invincible had not sent that message, or had sent it wrong. Had sent instead the message that the things the world government tried to kill had a way of being harder to kill than projected. Koala finished with Sabo's shoulder, tied off the bandaging with the precision she always brought to it, and sat back on her heels and looked at Marineford, getting smaller as the boat moved away from it. Dragon is going to have words, she said. Dragon is going to say I told you it was a risk, Sabo said. And then he's going to say you came back. And then we're going to have the Blackbeard conversation. The Blackbeard conversation is going to be very long, she said. Yes, Sabo agreed. It is. Ace looked at both of them. You two have been doing this for 12 years, he said. Yes, Sabo and Koala said, at the same time, with the slightly different inflections of two people who had been answering the same question from different angles for 12 years and had made a kind of unconscious harmony of it. Ace looked between them. An expression moved across his face that was reading something he'd filed away for later comment. He stored it with visible deliberateness and returned his attention to the sea ahead. The transport ships were close now. The operatives who'd held position through the battle were visible on the decks, heads turned toward the approaching boat, counting. Sabo watched them count, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the boat's occupants confirmed, and watched the collective adjustment in their posture that meant the count was complete and the number was right. Everyone present. The boat reached the transport ship's side and they climbed aboard, and Sabo stood on the deck and turned once to look back at Marineford, the way he'd stood on the deck of Dragon's first ship when he was 11 years old and looked at the stars and understood that the horizon was a promise and not a limit. The battle at Marineford was still visible from here. The sounds of it carrying across the water, the flags of both sides, the enormous committed violence of a conflict that had been engineered by people who believed the world could be controlled through overwhelming force. It couldn't. It never could. The proof was in the empty scaffold and the fire at Ace's fingers and the revolutionary transport ships flying no flag, carrying people who had decided that being something the world tried to erase was not a reason to stay erased. "Let's go," Ace said beside him. "Yes," Sabo said. They went. Chapter 6. 3 cups. Sabadi archipelago smelled like tree sap and sea salt, and the particular kind of commerce that happened in places where every kind of person passed through. The mangrove roots were enormous, each tree a world unto itself, the roots arching out of the sea like the ribcages of buried giants, the spaces between them housing entire districts built on platforms and bridges that had accumulated over decades into something that was either a city or a very organized accident. Bubbles floated everywhere, catching the light, bursting against the roots and the buildings and each other in constant small celebrations of iridescence. Sabo had been to Sabadi twice before, both times on intelligence work, both times moving quickly through and out. He never had reason to stay long enough to form opinions about it. Now he was sitting at a table outside a food stall on the 41st Grove's main walkway, his shoulder in proper bandaging under his shirt, his hat on the table beside his coffee, and he was watching the foot traffic with the particular quality of attention that didn't look like attention. Ace was beside him, eating something that appeared to be most of the menus simultaneously. They'd been on Sabadi for 2 days. The battle at Marineford had ended. The reports that reached them through revolutionary channels were still fragmentary, the picture still assembling itself, but the shape of it was clear enough. Whitebeard had pulled his fleet back after receiving confirmation that Ace was clear. The Marines had let them go, not from mercy but from the specific calculation that a continued engagement with a Whitebeard fleet that now had no reason to fight to the death was a bad use of force. The scaffold was empty. Nobody had gotten the execution they'd prepared for. Sabo had sent Dragon a full report. Dragon had responded with 3 lines, received. "We will discuss when you return. Koala is right about the Blackbird timeline." Which was Dragon's version of well done, and also his version of this conversation is not finished, and Sabo had read both meanings clearly and filed them in the appropriate order. Koala was in the 43rd Grove managing the Revolutionary Network's local contacts, and would be back by afternoon. Hack had taken the transport ships to a safe anchorage and was keeping them ready. Ace put down an empty bowl and picked up a full one. "He's going to be here today," he said. "You said that yesterday," Sabo said. "I was right yesterday," Ace said. "He just arrived a day later than I thought." He ate 3 spoonfuls. "He's always late. You said he'd come through Sabadi and I agreed," Sabo said. "I didn't agree on the timeline." "The timeline is today," Ace said, with the serene confidence of someone whose knowledge of a specific person was structural rather than analytical. "I can feel it." Sabo looked at him. "You can feel it?" "Yeah. That's not how information works," Sabo said. "It's how Luffy works," Ace said. Sabo picked up his coffee. It was very hot and very strong, the Sabo variety being made with beans from a grove district that took the whole enterprise seriously. He drank it and looked at the foot traffic, the fishermen and the traders and the people in transition, the whole cross-section of the world that Sabao's position made inevitable, and thought about Luffy. He'd been thinking about Luffy for 12 years, but the thinking had changed quality recently. For 12 years, Luffy had been a fixed point, the place this was all heading toward, the reunion that waited at the end of a long preparation. Now the preparation was done and the reunion was hours or days away, and the thinking had become specific. What did you say, after this long, to someone who'd grieved you? He knew what he'd said to Ace. That had come out of the moment, shaped by the 11 years and the ship and the new world air. It had been right because it was honest, and it had been honest because there was no version of that conversation that could be anything else. Ace had the capacity for the complicated. He'd processed grief and anger and relief and the long reach of time simultaneously, and had come out the other side with something intact. Luffy was different. Not simpler, exactly. Sabo had always refused to make the mistake of thinking Luffy was simple. But Luffy's complexity operated on a different register, direct, complete, without the scaffolding of pride or strategy, or the careful management of how you appeared. Luffy felt things the whole way. When he'd cried for Sabo at 10 years old, it had been total. When he found out Sabo was alive, it would be total in the other direction too. Sabo was, he realized, sitting with his coffee going cold, slightly afraid of it. Not afraid of Luffy. Afraid of what it would feel like to be the direct object of that kind of complete feeling after so long of being its absence. "You're thinking very loudly," Ace said without looking up from his bowl. "I'm thinking quietly," Sabo said. "You're just nosy. You do a thing with your jaw," Ace said. "When you're working something out that you don't know the answer to. You do it in your sleep too, apparently. Koala mentioned it." Sabo turned to look at him. "Koala mentioned, she's very observant," Ace said. "She said you've been doing the jaw thing since you were 11? He looked at Sabo with the grin that had been arriving more easily over the last few days, the one that was the real one. "What are you working out?" Sabo looked at the bubbles drifting past the walkway. One of them caught the light and held it for a moment, perfect, iridescent, improbable, and then burst against a root. "What do I say to him?" Sabo said. Ace set down his bowl. He was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough to be significant. "Nothing complicated," he said finally. "You know Luffy. Complicated doesn't land the way you want it to." He looked at the grove's arch above them. "You say you're here. You let him do the rest. He's going to be angry," Sabo said. "Yes. Then he's going to cry. Probably. Then he's going to hug you until you make that noise," Ace said. Sabo looked at him. "What noise?" "The noise people make when Luffy hugs them and they weren't expecting the full commitment," Ace said. "Sort of a. He made a sound that was approximately the noise in question." "I'm not going to make that noise," Sabo said. "You're going to make the noise," Ace said pleasantly and picked up another bowl. Luffy arrived in the 41st Grove at noon. Sabo heard him before he saw him, a commotion moving through the foot traffic that had the specific character of Luffy-adjacent chaos. Not violence exactly, but the disturbance pattern of someone moving at high speed and maximum enthusiasm through a space that hadn't been designed for either. People stepped aside and then looked again, and the looking had the quality of people trying to determine whether this was a problem or just a phenomenon. Then he came around the corner of the walkway. He was 17. He had the hat. Of course he had the hat. The straw hat that had been Shanks and had become the most recognizable object in the East Blue and was apparently becoming recognizable in the Grand Line too, based on the 30 million berry bounty that had since doubled if the latest reports were accurate. He was moving at what was probably a considered speed for him, which looked like a full sprint to everyone else. He was looking around the grove with the open, absorbing attention of someone who was trying to find something specific. He found Ace first. "Ace." The sound hit the walkway like a physical object. Luffy launched himself forward. There was rubber involved, the arm extending to close the distance faster than legs could manage, and hit Ace with the full commitment collision that Ace absorbed by being Ace, which meant he barely moved and made a sound very close to the one he described to Sabo. Sabo stood up from the table. Ace was grinning, arms around Luffy, saying something too low to hear, and Luffy was talking at approximately 3 times the speed of normal conversation, and both of them were doing what they did, filling the space between them with the particular substance of brothers who had been apart, and were now not apart. Then Luffy looked up. He saw Sabo. The noise on the walkway didn't stop. The foot traffic kept moving, the grove kept being itself, bubbles kept drifting and bursting, but something in the immediate air changed in quality. Luffy looked at Sabo and Sabo looked at Luffy, and there was a moment of complete stillness that had nothing to do with lack of motion. Luffy let go of Ace. He walked towards Sabo. Not at the usual Luffy speed, slower, with the deliberateness of someone checking something with their eyes that their understanding hadn't caught up to yet. He stopped 3 feet away. His face was doing everything simultaneously, shock and recognition and the beginning of several emotions fighting for priority. "Sabo," Luffy said. "Yes," Sabo said. "You're..." Luffy looked at him. He looked at his face, his hands, his hat on the table, the coat, all of it. Checking. "You're alive." "I've been alive," Sabo said. "For a long time." He stopped. Not because the words weren't there. Because the words felt insufficient for the specific weight of this moment, the 12 years compressing into the 3 feet of space between them. "I should have found a way to tell you sooner," he said. "I was wrong not to. I knew it then and I know it now." Luffy looked at him for another moment. The emotions were still fighting. Sabo could see them moving through his face the way weather moved through the open sky, without much attempt at concealment. Anger was there. Grief, the old kind, being updated in real time. And underneath both of them, something larger and more fundamental. "You were dead," Luffy said. "We thought you were dead." "I know," Sabo said. "I cried," Luffy said. He said it without embarrassment, as plain fact. "I know," Sabo said. And the wound that had lived under 12 years of purpose made itself felt, specific and complete, because knowing something and having it said directly to you by the person it was true about were entirely different things. "That was bad," Luffy said. "That you were dead." "Yes," Sabo said. "And you weren't," Luffy said. He was working through this with the sequential thoroughness he brought to things that mattered. "You were somewhere else." "Yes." "Why didn't you come back?" No accusation in it. Just the question, direct and complete. "I thought I should be something first," Sabo said. "Before I came back. I thought..." He stopped. He thought about what he told Ace on the striker, about being worth the reunion. He thought about Dragon's 3-line message and Koala's 11 years of making sure he walked back out of things and the marble of it, the long construction of who he'd become, and what it was for. "I was wrong," he said. "You didn't need me to be anything. You just needed me to be alive." Luffy was quiet. Then he punched Sabo in the arm. Not lightly. Luffy at 17 was not the same Luffy as at 10. The Grand Line had been doing its work, and the punch had weight. Sabo took it squarely because he deserved to take it squarely. "That's for dying," Luffy said. "I didn't actually die," Sabo said. "That's for making me think you died," Luffy said. "Fair," Sabo said. And then Luffy hugged him. It was, he would later think, exactly what Ace had described. Total commitment, no self-consciousness, the full force of 12 years of missing someone delivered without warning or ceremony. Sabo made the noise. He absolutely made the noise. He was aware of making it, and was not in a position to prevent it, and also found, to his considerable surprise, that he didn't particularly want to. He put his arms around his brother. He held on. Behind them, from the table, Ace said nothing. But Sabo was fairly certain, even with his face currently pressed against Luffy's shoulder, that Ace was smiling. They ate. This was, Sabo reflected, the most Luffy-appropriate response to any major emotional event, Food, immediately, in enormous quantities, with conversation running over and through and alongside the eating without any particular distinction between the two activities. Ace ordered everything on the menu again with the ease of practice. Luffy ordered everything on the menu plus several things that weren't on the menu but that he'd apparently seen someone else eating and pointed at. Sabo ordered more coffee and a meal that was reasonable, and watched his brothers with the feeling that had no single name, the one that was relief and grief and joy and the particular ache of beautiful things that had been a long time coming. Luffy talked. He talked about the crew, each member described with the specific detail of someone who had collected them the way other people collected important objects, each description carrying the weight of a story compressed to its essential characters. Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji, Chopper. He talked about them with the unself-conscious pride of someone who didn't fully realize they were describing something remarkable, which was exactly how Luffy talked about everything he built. Sabo listened and asked questions, and Ace ate and interjected and corrected Luffy's timeline of events with the frequency of someone who had heard some of these stories before and had opinions about the accuracy. "You fought a warlord," Sabo said, processing the Alabasta account. "Crocodile," Luffy said. "He was in the sand." "He's a Shichibukai with a Logia type," Sabo said. "How did you water?" Luffy said, with the simplicity of someone who has solved a problem and considers the solution self-evident. "He can't dry out water fast enough." He bit into something. "Also blood works." Sabo looked at him. "Blood?" "Yeah. Also wet." Ace pointed at Sabo. "You thought he'd need us to protect him." "I thought he'd benefit from support," Sabo said carefully. "He fought Crocodile," Ace said. 3 times, Luffy said cheerfully. "Third time worked," Ace said. Sabo looked at his brother, 17 years old, straw hat, the Grand Line already working its changes on him, a crew of 6 and a bounty that was climbing. He thought about the boy in the gray terminal who had attached himself to 2 older kids with the irresistible certainty that they were his brothers, and understood that the certainty had been correct about more than just them. Luffy was right about most things. He was right in the way that people were right when they operated from something true rather than something calculated. "Tell me about the Revolutionary Army," Luffy said, turning to Sabo with the abruptness of someone whose thoughts moved faster than conversational transitions. "Your chief of staff?" "Yes," Sabo said. "Dragon is in it," Luffy said. "Someone told me Dragon is the most wanted man in the world." "Yes," Sabo said. "He is." Luffy looked at him with the expression he made when information was arriving that connected to other information in a way that he found interesting. "Dragon saved you," he said. "He pulled me out of the water," Sabo said. "After the Celestial Dragon's ship." He stopped, checked Luffy's expression. "You know about Celestial Dragons?" "Saw one," Luffy said. "In Sabaody." Something moved through his expression that was brief and complete, and said everything about what that encounter had looked like. "I punched him." A silence at the table. "You punched a celestial dragon," Sabo said. "He shot Hachi," Luffy said simply. Ace had stopped eating. He was looking at Luffy with an expression that was somewhere between absolute pride and the specific terror of someone who understood the exact magnitude of what his brother had just described. "Luffy," he said. "He shot my friend," Luffy said. "So I punched him." Sabo thought about a celestial dragon's ship firing on a fishing boat for no reason. He thought about the fishermen who hadn't come back up. He thought about 12 years of building toward a world where that firing had consequences. He looked at his youngest brother, who had walked up to a celestial dragon and punched him in the face because the celestial dragon had hurt someone Luffy cared about, and felt something clarify in him with the completeness of a long equation reaching its answer. "Good," Sabo said. Ace looked at him. Luffy looked at him. He met both their eyes and said nothing else because nothing else was needed. Luffy grinned, the full one, the one that took up his whole face. "You think like me," he said to Sabo. "We always did," Sabo said. The afternoon moved through the grove in gold and bubble light. The food stall's owner had learned, at some point during the extended meal, to simply keep bringing things rather than waiting for orders, and had developed a philosophical acceptance of the situation that suggested experience with this type of customer. Koala arrived at mid-afternoon, found the three of them at the table, Ace asleep against the stall's wall, hat over his face, the way he could sleep anywhere with the practiced ease of years at sea. Luffy interrogating Sabo about Revolutionary Army operations with the specific focused curiosity he applied to things he found genuinely interesting. And stood at the edge of the scene for a moment with an expression that moved through several things before settling. Sabo saw her arrive. "Luffy," he said. "This is Koala." Luffy looked at her. "You're the one who taught Sabo to fight," he said. Koala's expression adjusted. "He taught himself, mostly. She's being modest," Sabo said. "She's been fighting me to a standstill since we were 11. "Not a standstill," Koala said. "I've been winning since we were 11. Functionally a standstill," Sabo said. "He still does the thing where he redirects instead of blocking," she said to Luffy, the tone of someone sharing a long-standing complaint with a new and sympathetic audience. 12 years I've been telling him blocking is sometimes correct and redirecting is more efficient," Sabo said. "Sometimes efficient isn't the point," Koala said. Luffy was watching this exchange with the bright, absorbing attention he gave to things he was enjoying. "You're like brothers," he said to both of them. They looked at each other. Koala's expression did its complicated thing. Sabo looked at the table. "We've worked together for 12 years, he said. "Brothers," Luffy said, with the certainty of someone whose definition of the word was broad and structural and based on pattern rather than blood. He said it the same way he'd said it about Ace and Sabo in the forest, simply, completely, as if naming something already true. Koala sat down. She ordered coffee. She didn't argue with Luffy's assessment. By early evening, Ace was awake and Luffy had been reunited with his crew, who arrived in the grove with the specific collective energy of people who had been keeping themselves occupied and were now releasing that effort in various directions. They were a remarkable group. Sabo assessed them with the involuntary professional habit he brought to every new set of people and found, each time, something that surprised him. The swordsman carried himself with a quality that was recognizable to anyone who'd spent time around genuinely exceptional fighters. Not performance, just presence. The navigator had the eyes of someone who read weather and situations with equal precision. The others each had their own thing, the specific individuality that Luffy's crew seemed to require as an entry condition. Luffy introduced Sabo to each of them with a simple formula. "This is Sabo. He's my brother. He was dead but he wasn't." This produced varied reactions: surprise, confusion, the quick social recalibration of people meeting important information unexpectedly. But they absorbed it with the adaptability of a crew that had presumably been absorbing unexpected information since the day they'd signed on. The navigator, Nami, looked at Sabo with the specific assessment of someone who measured things carefully. "You're really alive?" she said. "I'm really alive," he confirmed. "He punched a Marine captain with 40 men and walked out," Koala said from the side, with the tone she reserved for Sabo's more excessive operational choices, which somehow managed to be simultaneously critical and promotional. "You did that?" the swordsman said. Not impressed exactly, more the expression of someone recalibrating a category. 60 to 75% confident, Sabo said. Ace, sitting on a root behind him, made a sound. Sabo didn't look back, but he was fairly certain it was the grin. They made a fire on the grove platform as the evening came in, not difficult in Ace's company, and the group arranged itself around it with the organic logic of people finding their comfortable distances. Luffy ended up between his brothers the way water ended up in the lowest available space, without deliberation or announcement. He was simply there, between Ace and Sabo, in the firelight, eating something he'd acquired from somewhere without breaking the conversation. The conversation moved through everything and nothing, Luffy's crew telling stories, Koala and Hack adding the dry Revolutionary Army counterpoint that made Luffy's adventures sound simultaneously more and less improbable, Ace producing fire tricks for no reason except that fire was available and boredom was insufficient. The night came in around them and the grove was full of its own sounds, the water below the roots and the bubbles and the distant activity of 40,000 people passing through. Sabo was quiet for stretches of it. Not absent, he was fully present, following every thread, responding when addressed, laughing when laughter was appropriate, and it was appropriate with some frequency. But there were moments when he simply sat in it and let it be what it was. At some point the crew dispersed gradually toward their ship, Nami first, then the others in pairs, until it was the three brothers and Koala and the fire. Koala stood up. "I'm going to check on the transport ships," she said. She picked up her jacket from the root she'd been sitting on and looked at Sabo with an expression that had no performance in it, direct, warm, leaving him to this without comment. She touched his shoulder briefly, the uninjured one, and went. The three brothers and the fire. The grove settling into its late-night rhythms around them. Somewhere in the 43rd Grove, Luffy's crew was on their ship. Somewhere to the south, Dragon was reading reports and thinking about the Blackbird timeline. Somewhere in the New World, Whitebeard's fleet was moving, and Blackbird was building toward whatever came next, and the world was doing the complicated, ongoing thing it always did. Here there was Firelight, and the three of them. "I have something," Sabo said. He reached into his coat. He'd been carrying it since Baltigo. He'd taken it from his room before leaving, the impulse not fully examined, more instinct than plan. He set 3 small cups on the flat root between them. Traveled ones, the rims a little knocked, acquired from different places over different years, one from the West Blue, one from a market in the New World that sold things made in Goa Kingdom as collectibles, which had struck him as worth having. The third was just a cup, plain and serviceable. He set a bottle beside them. Nothing ceremonial. Rice wine from the 43rd Groves Market, bought this morning on the way to the food stall, on the same instinct. Luffy looked at the cups. His face did something that went very still and very deep at the same time, the recognition landing with the full weight of what it meant. Ace looked at the cups. He said nothing. His jaw worked once. Sabo poured all 3. "We did this once before," he said. He kept his voice level because if he didn't his voice was going to do something he wasn't ready for. "In the forest. We were—" He stopped. "We were children and the world was small and we thought it was the end of something." He picked up his cup. "It wasn't. It was the beginning. And I spent 12 years. He stopped again. "Let it breathe. I spent 12 years building toward this. Toward being something worth coming back to." He looked at Ace, then at Luffy. "I was wrong about needing to be something first. You told me that, Luffy, when you were 10 years old. You said it without saying it. I just didn't understand it until recently." He paused. "I understand it now." Luffy picked up his cup. He wasn't looking at the cups, he was looking at Sabo, and his expression was doing everything, every feeling at full volume, no management of it. His eyes were bright and Sabo recognized the brightness. "Don't cry yet," Ace said, his own voice doing the thing voices did when they were being managed very carefully. "Wait until after." He picked up his cup. He looked at both of them. "I thought about you both every day," he said. "Even when I thought—" He stopped. Cleared his throat. "Every day. Both of you." "Same," Luffy said. His voice was thick. "Same," Sabo said. They held the cups up. The firelight caught the wine, turned it amber, held it there for a moment in the 3 small circles of their hands. "Brothers," Luffy said. "Brothers," Ace said. "Brothers," Sabo said. They drank. The grove breathed around them. The fire moved in the way fires moved, finding its angles, reading the air, being exactly what it was. Luffy put his cup down and wiped his face with his sleeve with complete unself-consciousness. Ace looked at the fire with the expression of someone who had set something down that had been heavy and was feeling the absence of the weight. Sabo held his empty cup and understood that some circles closed not with a snap but with a gradual coming together, the way 2 halves of a thing found each other in the tide. What happens now? Luffy said. He said it the way he said everything that mattered, directly, without softening the actual question. You keep going, Sabo said. Toward whatever you're going toward. Ace goes back to Whitebeard. He paused. The army has work. The world needs what the army is building. He looked at his brothers. None of that changes. But we're not. Luffy started. We're not dead anymore, Sabo said. Either of us. He looked at Luffy. You know where we are. We know where you are. That's different from before. He thought about the letter he'd sent from Goa Kingdom. I'll find you when the world is different. The world isn't different yet, he said. But we're in it differently. Luffy thought about this with the focused consideration he brought to things that actually required it, looking at the fire. Then he nodded, the single certain nod of someone who has located the truth in a complicated thing and claimed it. You'll come find us, he said. When things happen? Yes, Sabo said. And you'll come find us? Yes, Luffy said. No question in it. It was already decided, had been decided 12 years ago in a forest with 3 children and 3 cups and the absolute refusal to let the world's definitions of possible apply. Ace leaned back against the root behind him and looked at the grove's canopy overhead, the roots arching up into the dark, the bubbles drifting in the firelight, the enormous patient architecture of things that had been growing for a very long time. I'm going to be king of the pirates, he said. Luffy turned to him immediately. I'm going to be king of the pirates. One of us is, Ace said with a grin. Me, Luffy said. We'll see, Ace said. It'll be me, Luffy said to Sabo, appealing to the third party with the expectation of support. I'm going to change the world, Sabo said. Someone else can be king of the pirates. Ace pointed at him. That's a dodge. That's a clear statement of intent, Sabo said. You're not going to pick, Ace said. I'm not going to pick, Sabo confirmed. You're both right about yourselves and I'm not adjudicating. Koala would pick, Luffy said. Koala would tell you both you're being ridiculous and then go do something useful, Sabo said. She's smart, Luffy said, with genuine admiration. Yes, Sabo said. She is. The fire moved. The grove breathed. Somewhere in the channels between the roots, something large moved through the water and was gone. The night had reached its deepest point, the middle hours when the darkness was absolute, and the stars above the grove canopy were the only light besides the fire, and the fire was enough. Sabo looked at his brothers. Ace, who had always been the gravity of their small system, the center that the others orbited, the one whose certainty about himself had made space for the others to find their own. Luffy, who had never orbited anything, had always simply moved in the direction of what mattered and arrived there somehow. Both of them real, both of them present, both of them exactly and completely who they'd always been and also changed in every way that living changed a person. He thought about the 11-year-old on Dragon's ship, looking at the east window, understanding that the horizon was a promise. He thought about every year since, the fights and the operations and the long work of becoming something, and understood that none of it had been preparation for this moment because this moment didn't require preparation. It required presence. He was present. That was the whole thing. I have to go back to Dragon, he said. In a few days. There's work. I know, Ace said. There's always work, Luffy said without complaint, just acknowledgement. Yes, Sabo said. But I found you first. He looked at both of them. I wanted to find you first. Ace looked at him. The firelight made shadows of his face, and in the shadows was every version of Ace that had existed. The suspicious child in the forest, the boy with the sake cups, the young man on the striker saying I miss you with the armor off. All of them present, all of them the same person, all of them his brother. Yeah, Ace said quietly. I know. Luffy lay down on his back on the platform and looked at the sky and started talking about something entirely unrelated, A fish he'd caught that had been enormous and had gotten away and had definitely been the biggest fish anyone had ever seen. And the story grew as he told it in the way Luffy's stories grew, organic and unstoppable. And Ace started arguing the details with the automatic reflex of someone who couldn't let an exaggeration stand, and Sabo listened to both of them and watched the bubbles drift past in the firelight, and didn't say anything because there was nothing to add. He was here. His brothers were here. The fire was warm and the night was deep and the world was enormous in every direction, full of work and danger and the long, ongoing project of making it into something worth having, and none of that was a problem. It was, in fact, the whole point. The fire burned down slowly, the way good fires did, not fast and consuming but steady and patient, giving its light without rushing through it. The three brothers stayed beside it until the deep hours, and then Luffy was asleep between them with the abrupt completeness of someone who had found the right place and simply stopped, and Ace put his hat over his own face and leaned back and was gone within minutes, the way he always was, the way he'd always been. Sabo sat up for a while longer. He looked at the fire's last hour, the coals going amber and red, and at his brothers on either side of him, and at the grove's dark canopy overhead. He thought about writing a letter. Not to them, they were here. To whoever came next, the next person who was 11 years old, and looking at a horizon and couldn't yet tell whether it was an ending or a beginning. It was a beginning, he would write. It's always a beginning. Even when it feels like everything is on fire and you're 6 inches below the surface of the burning water and nothing is working correctly, especially then. Come up. Someone will pull you out. And if they don't, come up anyway. He didn't write the letter. He filed it in the place where the things worth saying eventually found their form, and he watched the fire and listened to his brothers breathe, and when the last coal went dark he lay down and closed his eyes and slept without dreaming, deeply and completely, for the first time in 12 years. The grove breathed. The sea moved. The bubbles drifted and burst and were replaced by more bubbles, iridescent and improbable and continuously present, the way hope worked, not permanent, but unending. And in the morning, the horizon was exactly where it had always been, waiting.